Kuya, kumain ng lamisa.
As we observe the 18-day campaign to end violence against women or VOW from November 25th to December 12th, we ask you, Lord, to look with kindness upon all of us who are gathered here. Fill our hearts and minds with love, wisdom, and courage as we face our daily lives. We pray for all women and girls who suffer from domestic violence, rape, incest, sexual harassment, trafficking, prostitution, and other forms of violence. May they have the courage to break their silence, find protection, healing, and justice. We pray for the perpetrators of VOW that they may learn to respect women and girls and stop the violence. O loving Father and Mother, send us your Spirit so that everything that we do will be done with love and respect for our fellow humans. Regardless of age, sex, class, ethnicity, and ability, O powerful God, develop in us a high regard for the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of everyone, and bestow on us the capacity to promote, protect, and fulfill the rights of women and girls. Almighty Creator, grant us the strength to stand up against all forms of violence happening to women and girls, the sharpness to recognize a silenced victim of VOW, the courage to speak up against VOW, the resourcefulness to help a victim of VOW, and the resolve to never commit any form of VOW. For all of this, we implore your guidance. Amen.
To our guest speakers who will be introduced later, to the Executive Director and Provost of the Philippine Normal University South Luzon, Dr. Leia Amor S. Cortez, to the Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, Dr. Mary Paulina V. Saquing, to the Corporate Secretary of Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, Ms. Norliza M. Nordan, to the former Gender and Development Head of Philippine Normal University South Luzon, Professor Brenda B. Villamor, to the newly designated Godhead of PNU South Luzon, Professor Iona Ophelia B. Zanoria, to my co-PNU ones, and to everyone present here today, a pleasant morning to all of you. Let peace, happiness, and contentment thrive in our hearts today. Once again, good morning to all those who are with us here on Zoom, and also to our viewers via Facebook or YouTube Live. Hello, everyone, and I would like to welcome all of you to our webinar on gender equality and climate change. And before we proceed with our program, let me first present to you our house rules and our safe space guidelines. For our gender equality and climate change house rules, first, respect and professionalism are expected to be observed. This webinar is being video and audio recorded and streamed on YouTube. Putting your camera on during the discussion is at your discretion. Please mute your microphones for ease of communication. You may use the chat box for your questions or any feedback, and the moderator will relay them to the speakers during the allotted time. A certificate will be sent to your registered email address upon completion of the evaluation after the webinar. For our safe space guidelines, be respectful of privacy and or confidentiality. Don't share another person's private story if you are not certain it is for consumption outside of this community. Be careful not to out others without their consent. Do, however, take what is learned from others in this community and share liberally. What we presume to know about others is often based on stereotyping or profiling and gets in the way of learning. If we set aside our presumptions, we open ourselves up to what is real and authentic. Avoid language that presumes that all people are in the majority. Find points of agreement as well as points of disagreement. We are not here to debate or to establish who is right and who is wrong. Debating creates barriers rather than bridges to open dialogue. When speaking, speak for yourself only. This relieves speakers from the pressure to speak on behalf of all others with similar identities and precludes generalizing about people with other identities. Recognize that your experiences, values, and perspectives are unique. RESPECT. Respect. Validate and support the ideas, feelings, and experiences of others. Strive to learn about experiences other than your own. Okay, so once again, good morning to all of you, and I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is part of our celebration of the International Women's Day. And this event or webinar would not be made possible without the initiative of the Philippine Normal University South Luzon Gender and Development Office, of course, in partnership with the Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. So before we begin with our session for today, let us give everyone a virtual applause. Everyone, please. Okay, thank you very much. And at this juncture, let us hear the opening remarks from the Executive Director and Provost of the Philippine Normal University South Luzon. Let us all, let us all welcome Dr. Leia Amor S. Cortez.
Okay, so good morning. Okay, so it is an honor for me to give the opening remarks on this PNUSL International Women's Day celebration program with this year's theme Gender Equality and Climate Change. I would like to greet our campus officials who are here with us today, to our Dean for Academics and Livelihood Education, Dr. Amor Lonisa, to the Director of OS, Dr. Lucila Scleto, to our OIC Director for Finance and Administration, Ms. Mia Escurdo, to our guests,
Nawala si Ma'am Leia?
Siguro ma'am, nawala po. Baka na-disconnect.
Baka po medyo mahina lang po yung signal ni Ma'am Leia Amor Cortez, our EDP. Sige po, mapapakinggan po natin ang kanyang opening remarks maya-maya lang. Magpo-proceed po ba tayo, ma'am?
Okay. Okay lang. Mag-proceed na lang tayo.
Okay, so before we proceed and introduce our speaker for this morning, let me know if everyone is ready by giving a thumbs up or heart emoji. Sige po, pwede po kayong mag-send sa ating chat box ng heart emoji or kaya thumbs up kung ready na kayong makinig para sa session natin ngayong umaga. Okay. Okay, so I guess everyone is ready and we are all ready to welcome our first speaker. And now to introduce our first speaker, let us have the Corporate Secretary of Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. Let us all welcome Ms. Norliza M. Nordan.
Okay, before po yung introduction of the speaker, allow me to give the rationale of the program for this webinar on gender equality and climate change. To our Executive Director and Provost, Dr. Leia Amor Cortez, to our Dean for Academics and TLE, Dr. Amor Lunisa, to the Director for Finance and Administration Engineer, Dan D. Sorio, to our invited guest speaker who will be introduced afterwards, faculty, staff, and students who are here, and our partners, the Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning. A pleasant morning to all. The month of March is celebrated as the Women's Month, and every March 8 is the International Women's Day. For this year, the International Women's Day theme is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. This theme features the contribution of women in climate change response and disaster risk reduction and mitigation. PNU South Luzon, being the technology and livelihood education hub, joins the nation and the international community in honoring the women. With this theme of today's program, Gender Equality and Climate Change, it is very crucial that everyone should be aware of the status of the climate change as it triggers disasters, creating impact to the most vulnerable groups of the population and industry as well, especially agriculture and fishery. On the other hand, it is imperative that gender equality and women's empowerment should be strengthened to make significant contributions for a sustainable development. This forum will also enlighten everyone how gender equality is linked with climate change, which will be translated into simple actions that will, in a way, contribute in mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. Thank you, and may we all enjoy learning from our invited speakers for this event. So to introduce our guest speaker,
To the Executive Director and Provost of the PNU South Luzon Campus, Dr. Leia Amor Escor. Executive Director and Provost of the PNU South Luzon Campus, Dr. Leia Amor S. Cortez. To the Gender and Development Head, Professor Iona Ofelia B. Zamora. To the university officials, faculty members, students, guests, our colleagues from the Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning, good morning. Our speaker today is the head of the Alumni Affairs of St. Mary's University of Bayumbong, Nueva Vizcaya. Previous to this designation, he handled the Cultural Affairs portfolio and served as research coordinator. In the course of his functions in the academe, he had involved himself in various undertakings and advocacies, including gender in development and gender sensitivity. The following are considered his areas of interest: human behavior in organization, foreign language and culture, academic research, corporate branding and identity, and guidance and counseling. Aside from his background in philosophy, theology, and human relations, he holds the following degrees: Bachelor in Secondary Education, Master in Education, Master in Business Administration Top Executive Program, and Juris Doctor. To talk on gender equality and climate change, please welcome Professor Sherwin Jerry Paul V. Saquing.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Nor. Good morning to Dr. Leia Amor S. Cortez, the Executive Director and Provost of PNU South Luzon, and to the academic officials of PNU, to my colleagues in the Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning, and to our dear friends from the academy, professors and students alike. Isang mapagpalang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am Sherwin Jerry Paul V. Saquing from Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning, and today I will be discussing with you gender equality and climate change. And the title of my talk this morning is Breaking the Bias, Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, before I start with any of my talks, I always issue some assumptions. First is that perhaps some things that we would be hearing from me or from the other speaker would not be something new to you. Perhaps you may have learned it in other conventions, conferences, or seminars, perhaps in the classroom, from your exposure to media or social media for that matter. But it wouldn't hurt to hear these things from another perspective. It wouldn't hurt to review, to relearn, or to revisit these concepts. Okay. This morning I'm tasked to discuss gender equality, and it would help us to understand better this concept by discussing first on this thing called sex. Sex assignment typically happens at birth based on anatomical and physiological markers, which means this is based on biology. Male and female genitalia, both internal and external, are different, and male and female bodies have distinct hormonal and chromosomal makeups. Doctors use these factors to assign natal sex, which means when one is born, the sex is determined, for example, based on genitalia of the of the baby. So one is born male or one is born female. Okay. So sex is male or female. Kaya kung minsan when you check on when there are some forms that say that ask for your sex, you pick either male or female, and there are only two options. Intersex people are individuals born with any of several sex characteristics, including chromosomal patterns, gonads, or genitals that, according to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, do not fit typical binary notions of male or female bodies. Which means that may mga pinapanganak na hindi na ipapakita kaagad-agad kung ano sa. Okay? There are some characteristics that do not fit typical binary notions. Magkaiba ito doon sa sinasabi natin hermaphrodite. Kasi ang hermaphrodite, buo na yung kanilang sexual characteristics. Okay? Gender, on the other hand, refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. Remember that sex is determined by biology, for example, and gender includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, a man, a girl, or boy, as well as how they relate with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. This means that what we understood to be gender a long time ago, what was understood to be gender a long time ago, may now be understood or appreciated in a different light now. Because we see here in the last line that this varies from society to society and can change over time. So the appreciation of gender in one culture may be different from another culture, and there are always it is a dynamic thing that is happening. In the slide, ladies and gentlemen, now are different kinds of genders according to a source that I have. And because it could change over time, there could be some additions to this as well. Okay? So male and female still are part of gender, but there are other kinds of genders now, like bigender, androgyne, etc. The gender-bred person is understood to be those things everyone thinks they understand, but most people do not. You have to see gender is not binary. Gender is not just male or female. It is not either or. Okay? In many cases, it could be a mixture. It could be a combination. A bit of this, a dash of that, konting ganito, konting ganyan. And then later on, you would form this kind of person. There are several legends here. You have the brain, you have the heart, and you have that part in the genitalia. Okay? In gender identity, this means the womanness or manness of a person. The gender expression is how you present yourself as a person to other people in the way that you act, in the way that you dress, or in the way that you behave. Biological sex is the sex which means maleness or femaleness. And sexual attraction, the one that is marked with a heart there, the one that is marked with a heart it ranges from being sexually attracted to nobody to being sexually attracted to women or men, or to females or to femininity, or to males or masculinity. There's also a romantic attraction where it is possible for a person not to feel any sense of romantic attraction to anybody, or to be attracted to women, to females, or to a certain femininity, or on the other hand, to men, to males, or to a certain sense of masculinity. This is what we call the gender-bred person. Gender equality is the concept men and women, girls and boys have equal conditions, treatment and opportunities for learning, for realizing their true potential, human rights and dignity, and for contributing to and benefiting from economic, social, cultural, and political development. This is the concept that pantay po ang men and women, pantay po ang girls and boys. They're accorded the same treatment, pare-pareho ang pagtrato sa kanila, pare-pareho ang pagtingin sa kanila. Pare-pareho din po ang pagkakataon na iniaalay o inihahain para sa kanila upang kanilang makamit ang kataas-taasang potensyal. Okay? Gender equality. It is also the equal valuing by society. This is the way that society looks at them, but appreciates the similarities and differences of men and women, girls and boys, and the roles that they play in society. It is based on women and men being full partners in the home, community, and society, which means that, in a manner of speaking, gender equality does not talk about men and women contributing 50% each to society, to the home, to community, to make it a better place to live in. Is men and women contributing 100% of themselves in the home, in the community, and in the society. Para saan? Para mas maganda at kaaya-aya ang ating mundong ginagalawan. Gender equality does not mean that men and women will become the same, but that women's and men's rights, responsibilities, and opportunities will not depend on whether they are born male and female. Gender equality, ladies and gentlemen, is an admission or an appreciation that men and women are unique, but in their uniqueness, they also have similarities, and in both their uniqueness and similarities, they can contribute something beneficial to society. They have the same rights, they have the same responsibilities, they have the same opportunities or chances, which are not dictated by being born male or being born female. Okay, gender equality, remember that. However, when we talk about gender equality and gender equity, ang sinasabi na dito ngayon ay gender equity becomes the process. Itong magiging paraan para makamtan ang gender equality. What is gender equity? It is a recognition that we, women and gender diverse people, are not in the same starting position as men. This is because of historical and social disadvantages. Treating women, gender diverse people, and men equally might not actually be fair. In fact, it could create further disadvantage. Yan ang paniniwala ng gender equity. Gender equity measures are often needed to level the playing field. So ganito yan, ang gender equity, ang magiging paraan para ating makamit yung gender equality where men and women get the same opportunities and contribute 100% of themselves to make this place a better world to live in. Gender equity now is an acknowledgement na hindi po pantay ang mga pagkakataon, ang mga opportunities, ang mga rights and responsibilities ng mga lalaki sa mga babae. It is an admission that in some areas or in most areas, na mas nakakaangat ang lalaki. Okay? Why is this so? Because of historical and social disadvantages, which we shall be discussing more at length later on. What is gender equality? Okay, men and women in all spheres of life. Ito ang gustong mangyari ng okay? That they have the same equality between men and women. There is equality between men and women when both sexes are able to share equally in the distribution of power and influence. They have equal opportunities for financial independence through work or through setting up businesses. They enjoy equal access to education and the opportunity to develop personal ambitions, interests, and talents. They share responsibility for the home and children and are completely free from coercion, intimidation, and gender-based violence, both at work and at home. Let us focus now on the underlying terms. The situation right now tells us that men and women do not share equally in the distribution of power and influence. Let us look at companies or corporations. Sino ang mga nag-occupy ng mas matataas na tungkulin, generally speaking? Okay? Who are those who occupy the top posts, the CEOs, for example, or the FOOs or the CCOs? Okay? Are men and women given equal opportunities for financial independence when they want to come up with their own business? Do men and women enjoy equal access to education? Pare-pareho ba sila ng pagkakataon na binibigay para makapag-aral? Because in our society today, sometimes when you reach junior high or senior high, there is a question on sino ang mag-aaral. You know, sometimes it happens that the women will not be encouraged to pursue education because ang sasabihin is, in the end naman, at the end of the day, dyan ka sa bahay, mag-aalaga ng pamilya, mag-aaruga ng mga anak. Samantala, itong lalaki, pwede siya mag-aral, proceed to college, for example, because ikaw ang magtataguyod sa iyong pamilya. You will be the breadwinner of the family. Okay? Another one is they share responsibility for the home and children. Is this true today, that men and women share responsibility for the home and children? How many are actually stay-home dads as compared to the number of stay-home moms? How many of our fathers and mothers are working, and how many of them are not working and staying at home? Okay. Next one is between men and women who are not free from coercion, who are intimidated, and who are afforded gender-based violence. Sino ang naaabuso? Okay? Sino ang tinatakot? Okay? So that we would later on realize that because of this, we have an act called Bausi na binasal natin kanina. Gender bias is making decisions based on gender that result in favoring one gender over the other, which often results in contexts that are favoring men and or boys over women and or girls. Nakakita na ba kayo ng wanted? May mga nagpo-post ng mga wanted ads na kailangan nilang ng mga trabaho. Wanted, preferably male, preferably female. That automatically is gender bias. Kasi sinasabi natin dito, may mga companies na nag-hire, gusto nila na lalaki ang magtrabaho o babae ang magtrabaho. Okay? Most of the reasons they give is preferably male, preferably female, ay dahil ang trabahong ito ay para sa lalaki lang. Ang trabahong ito ay mas kaya ng babae. Which we realize is not true at all anymore. Because I will be giving some examples later on. There are gender issues on discrimination, exploitation, marginalization, and violence. In the Western countries, you're discriminated against, especially if you are a woman, and especially if you are black. If you're a black woman, we watch on social media so many videos on discrimination against women. What makes the videos worse would be a storyline that tells us that the woman being discriminated against is a black woman or is a woman of color. Okay? A discrimination is sinasangtabi ka and they are ignoring your potentials. Exploitation is abuse. Okay? Inaabuso. Dahil nandyan ka, bibigyan ka ng maraming trabaho, etc. For example, marginalization is iniiwan ka. Okay, you are marginalized, you are neglected. You are not actually part of the entire equation. In violence, this is something physical. Okay, this is something physical, generally speaking, but when we discuss Bausi later on, there's also economic violence. So violence is when all of these, ladies and gentlemen, all of these gender issues on discrimination, exploitation, marginalization, and violence have a very, very adverse or negative effect upon the victim. And who are victims of gender issues more often than not, they are the women. What are indicators of gender inequality? Paano natin nalalaman na mayroong gender inequality sa isang sitwasyon o sa isang pagkakataon? For example, let's look at the contents of a grade 8 math module. The emotional self, yun ang title niya. The way you feel about yourself and others. Emotional awareness is the capacity to tune into your own feelings, sense, inner signals, and recognize how your feelings affect you and your performance. It is an important skill for leadership at any level as well as many aspects of life. Beautiful introduction. Now let's focus on the columns. On the column marked feminine are the following descriptives or descriptions. passive, nurturing, gentle, submissive, yielding, tender. Beautiful characteristics. Masculine, aggressive, analytical, strong, dominant, in control, tough. Beautiful characteristics as well. But the question is, when you put these two in separate columns, marked feminine and masculine, you are telling grade 8 math students that only feminine, only women are capable of being passive, nurturing, gentle, submissive, yielding, or being tender. And only men can be aggressive, analytical, strong, dominant, in control, and tough. You're making these characteristics exclusive to the column they belong to. When as a matter of fact, we know females, we know women who are aggressive, who are analytical, who are strong, who are dominant, who are in control, and who are tough. And we know men who can be passive, nurturing, gentle, submissive, yielding, and tender. So dito pa lang, hindi natin na-realize na meron ng gender bias dito. Meron na siyang gender inequality. This could go crisscrossing, dear friends. At one time, you could be passive. At one time, you could be active. At one time, you could be aggressive. At another time, you could be yielding. You can be tough and tender at times. And this is regardless of whether you're feminine or masculine, of whether you're a man or a woman. Why is this now being taught to our kids? Good question. Next slide would tell us that meron tayong mga expression na ganito, palibhasa lalaki. So, nabibigyan sila ng lisensya. There is a certain societal tolerance of certain behaviors because ayaw mo na lalaki, palibhasa lalaki. Or there's also a certain warning given to women, sa babae mong tao, magdamit ka nga ng mabuti. Sa babae mong tao, magdamit ka ng mayos. Sa babae mong tao, hindi ka dapat lumalabas ng bahay. Gender inequality ito. Kasi nilalagay na natin sa isang tahon or isang box ang lalaki at babae at dito na lamang sila. Magdamit ka kasi ng maayos sa babae mong tao. Okay? Diyan ka lang sa bahay kasi babae ka. However, on the other hand, sasabihin niya, there is a certain way na, intindihin mo na lang, lalaki ang ako eh. Ganyan talaga kasi lalaki. Okay? So in these two statements, palibhasa lalaki and sa babae mong tao, on the side of palibhasa lalaki, there's a sense of permission or tolerance or understanding. Dahil lalaki siya, ganito kasi ang kanyang gender role. Sa babae mong tao, pero dapat ito ang mga sinusundin mong mga alipunpunin. Okay? Then later on, pag nag-drive ka, I'm sure you're into public transportation, for example, you get a Grab or a taxi, or for example, jeep or tricycle, na may nakita kang isang sasakyan na medyo nahirapan yung driver magmaniobra, and you look at the driver, makikita mong babae, kaya naman pala kasi babae. On one hand, you will understand why there is difficulty in maneuvering the vehicle kasi babae. On the other hand, there is a certain sense of frustration. Bakit kasi nagdadrive sa babaeng tao? Both extremes of understanding and anger towards a difficult to maneuver vehicle are not good. Hayaan mo na, babae kasi. Ano ba naman kasi sa babaeng tao nagdadrive? Gender bias, gender inequality. We may not realize this, ladies and gentlemen, but we hear people this, and sometimes we just follow their ears. We just allow them, and we don't react at all. In the late 80s or in the early 90s, I'm not really sure. There was a sitcom, there was a television show entitled Palibhasa Lalaki, which stars Richard Gomez, John Estrada, and Joey Marquez. Sila, I think, bababansada or something. Nagtagal ito sa television. And I think it stayed not only because of the stellar cast, kasi sikat na sikat itong tatlong mga artistang ito at the time, pero perhaps it's because of the title, and it became an expression in the late 80s and early 90s. Okay? Palibhasa lalaki. And it became an expression that it became actually an excuse for some behaviors of men. And then may makikita kang isang bata na makikisod, someone who tawag doon, you see a boy or a certain kid tumbling, and you say, wag kang uyak, or don't cry, don't cry, baby, you're a good boy, diba? Boys don't cry, wipe your tears, boys don't cry. Okay? And then, sometime in the past, last century, perhaps this was in the early 90s, there was a band called The Cure, which had a song, Boys Don't Cry, and the lyrics said, I try to laugh about it, cover it all up with lies. I try to laugh about it, hiding the tears in my eyes, because boys don't cry, boys don't cry. Okay? This aggravates the situation. This limits the emotional or psychological makeup of men, because this very famous band would say, hindi umiiyak ang lalaki, kaya you just laugh about it, you hide the tears, you contain your emotions, because boys don't cry. Inulit pa, boys don't cry. Gender inequality, problema nga ba ito? Is it really a problem now? We have discussed gender inequality, the manifestations or indicators of gender inequality, how it happens in society. Now, let's ask ourselves, is it really a problem? I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that all aspects of our being and existence are affected by gender inequality. Physical, social, cultural, political, economic, psychological, spiritual, environmental, etc. In the physical aspects of a person's being, gender inequality is a problem, is an issue. Before COVID-19, the Philippines saw about 2,600 women dying every year due to complications from pregnancy or childbirth. The maternal mortality cases in 2020 can increase up to 670 additional deaths from the 2019 level, which is a 26% increase. This is according to the UNFPA. So nakikita natin na hindi yata napaprioritize masyado ang maternal and health care. Okay? Dito sa pampisang na aspeto ng pagkatao. Okay? There are some physical cases, mas maraming babaeng nagkakasakit. And there are women who actually die of childbirth. There are women who are actually, let's say, neglected. Ilan ang lying-in clinics na meron sa mga bayan natin? Ilan ang mga kumadron? How many doctors do we have who actually attend to maternal health care? Because a more lucrative career in medicine, for example, would go to oncology, etc., would go to pediatrics, for example. Okay? But we realize that because of gender inequality, people actually die. In the social cultural aspect, ladies and gentlemen, is hindi natin we do not realize at all, but there are times that we actually are contributing to gender inequality in the social cultural aspect. Let's take, for example, itong mga marites. Uso-uso ito ay sa social media. Marites, si Mare ito ang latest. Marieta, Mare ito pa, tagdag sa latest. Marisol, Mare mong taga-sulsul. Marisa, Mare, sandali, may isa pa. Maris, Mare, ano lang sismis. Maribet, Mare mong sabit. Marie, Mare, yun na nga. Marina, ano Mare, ano na, Mariposa, Mare, post mo na. You see this, Mare, it uses Mare, which means it suggests that those whom we call Mare, who are women, sila yung source natin ng mga chismis. Bakit wala tayong tinatawag na parites, parieta, parisol, parisa, paris, paribet, pari, parina, pariposa? Or because society tells us na ang naging CCTV sa buong barangay ay kababaihan. You know? So we actually participate. Ano na mga marites? You know? But just saying that, ano na mga marites? Tumatawa tayo because we actually see the punchline or the humor in the fusion of these expressions. However, we do not understand na sa pagsasabi natin ng mga ito, may naidadaw tayo mga tao. may naidadaw tayong mga tipo ng tao. Okay? Political. From 1998 to 2016, the percentage of women elected in public office ranged from 16.1 to 21.44. Tumaas ang number of women elected into public office. In the 2019 national and local elections, only 20.16% of the candidates were female. So 2019, sa candidates, bumaba sila. Bumaba. Ang nanalo na mga babae in public office, tumaas from 16.1 to 21.44 from 1998 to 2016. Sa mga candidates naman, in the 2019 national and local elections, 20.16%, not even half. Not even half. Okay? What perhaps pushes women to run for public office? So we are saying here now that perhaps only a few women are being empowered to go for public service or to run for public office. Or perhaps there's also a sense of domination or intimidation among the counterpart, among their male counterparts na malakas kasi ito, hindi kaya ng babae. So we just let be. Okay? On the economic side, data collected from 6,971 skilled workers shows that on average, male employees in the Philippines earn 5,000 pesos more than their female counterparts, according to a source investing in women.asia. Mas malaki daw ang sahod ng mga kalalakihan kaysa sa kanilang female counterparts. Then there are more educational opportunities for men. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina. Men get more advanced education because they're expected to make taguyod their families. Where the women are not expected to take further education because at the end of the day, still there are people who say, at the end of the day, hindi mo naman kailangan ng diploma kasi sa bahay ka naman at mag-aalaga ng mga anak at maghahanda sa dinner ng asawa mo. There are still mindsets like that. Perhaps you disagree with what I am saying right now because we have progressive mindsets, but there are still people who believe that men should have further education and women may not even study at all because what they have to learn will be how to take care of kids and how to prepare meals. Okay, thereby making a very big impact on the economic existence of people because women are not able to contribute, to the economic uplift of their families, of their communities, and of society at large. Let's go for psychological. Gender inequality has a profound effect on mental health. Some of the psychological effects of gender inequality include higher levels of stress, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder in women and people of marginalized gender. Because of this discrimination sa tao. Okay?
Anong ulamin natin?
That's not only happens to women. This also happens to people of marginalized gender. Pag sinabing marginalized gender, those who identify themselves in other genders aside from being male or female, or aside from being a man or a woman. So they get discriminated against. When one gets discriminated against, one gets depressed. And let's not even start with suicidal tendency. So yung epekto nito sa psychological na pagkatao ng isang tao, napakalaki. The spiritual aspect is also affected because in some extreme cases, there are some religious extremists that do not allow women to express their faith. They do not allow women to express their faith. Or because of their religious beliefs, they discriminate against women. Because of their religious beliefs, they discriminate against women. There is a certain sect in the Philippines na ang binibigay lang na role sa mga kababaihan ay they do not give equal opportunities in cultivating their spiritual makeup. Okay? And then environmental, nakalagay dito na females have stronger attitudes towards protecting the environment and less favorable attitudes towards utilizing the environmental males. Females were also more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors and advocacy. This is a study entitled "Does Personality Negate the Relationship Between Sex and Environmentalism" in 2019. So even in our environmental protection, okay, we see here that gender inequality has a role or is a problem. Okay, what are the manifestations now or indicators of gender inequality? Uneven access to education, I have discussed this a while back. No, mas umaangat yung lalaki sa kanyang pag-aaral. Lack of employment equality, yes, there are women who graduate, who get education, who have degrees, but the employment equality is not the same. There is lack of employment equality because yun nga sinasabi ko, preferably male. Okay? Or perhaps for lower positions, it's preferably female. Okay, the next bullet will say job segregation. Okay, natanggap na yung natanggap ka nga sa trabaho, pero anong tipo ng trabaho ang binibigay sa iyo? May mga iba na taga-tinda ng kape. Yun lang ang pinapagawa sa kanila. Or they could actually do something more and something better for the company. Lack of legal protections. We also have this. We will be discussing later on legislation. Poor medical care. When there is poor medical care, there is gender equality. Okay? Then there's lack of political representation. This is a summary of what I just told you. Mas kukunti ang mga politicians natin na kababaihan. And racism, as I discussed a while back, in the Western countries, if you're a woman of color, you are being discriminated against. And there are societal mindsets na kalibhasa, lalaki, kababae mong tao. Okay, next one. Oprah Winfrey is a very famous TV host and was told at one time in her life or in her career that she was not entitled to equal pay when she started out. Why? Because she was a single woman, wala naman siyang pamilya, and wala naman siyang anak na itataguyod. She was not entitled to the same amount of salary her male counterpart was receiving. So what did Oprah do? Nagtayo siya ng sarili niya negosyo, and she's now a top billionaire host in the United States. A recent national comparison of average salaries indicate that women in the US earn approximately 80% as much as men. So, ang mga kalalakihan mas mataas ang sweldo nila ng 20% in the United States. How do we solve gender inequality? First, alamin natin, admit and acknowledge that gender inequality exists. Because, upon knowing that, magtataka tayo. Let's look at one root cause. This is patriarchy. It is a social system where men dominate over others. Okay, men dominate over others, which means over women and over other genders. Or perhaps over other women specifically. Na ang pinakamataas, ang kanilang pinuno palagi ay lalaki. Kaya mahirap sa mga kababaihan na pumasok sa politika kasi nasanay tayo na ang dapat na nangunguna, ang dapat na pinuno ay lalaki. Okay? This goes as far back as the Spanish times. This goes as far back perhaps even in our other influences. Patriarchy is seen in an Asian country, if I can say so, in Japan, but I think some changes are being made right now. In Japan, it is very normal to see that the man of the house works from 8 to 5 and the woman of the house prepares the meal. Pagdating ng lalaki, andyan ang babae, ibibigay sa kanya yung kanyang chinelas, aalisin ang sapatos. That's an example of patriarchy. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that gender inequality is not solved overnight. There has to be a very, very tedious process and procedure that we should follow in solving gender inequality. It is not solved by one person alone. Okay, it is not. We don't have a super person to solve this alone. We are all in this together. Magkakasama tayo, lalaki, babae, etc. Despite individual differences, we look at our similarities and we are all in this together. We are all on the same path towards attaining gender equality. Gender equality is not a woman's issue alone. Ang lalaki, meron siyang role sa pagpapalaganap ng gender equality. First, acknowledge male privilege. Ibig sabihin, you acknowledge that there is a certain level of superiority among males. Acknowledge that so that it would be better for you to understand why gender equality is of prime importance. You should show solidarity, makiisa ka sa mga advocacy sa gender equality, challenge negative masculinity. Yung mga tipo na, yun, palibhasa lalaki sa negative masculinity. help her transform power dynamics. It's women empowerment. Empower women. Give more tasks to, for example, in your classes or in your classroom situations. Assign some roles. Assign roles also to the girl students, for example, and then share your platform. Huwag Maria na isigaw ang gender equality. Men and boys for gender equality because this is good for countries, this is good for your companies or workplaces, and it is good for men. It is good for them. There's a certain sense of altruism, or there's a certain sense of having done something good when you become an advocate for gender equality. It is men empowering women. What is my hashtag now? Women empowering women. Because we already see here that women help women empower each other. Now the call is for men to help women get empowered. That's why another hashtag is we break the bias against women. Because actually as men, we realize that there are women who are far better than us. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to admit that because of what we have been used to in the patriarchal system of society. So all aspects of our being and existence are affected. Kagaya ng sinasabi ko kanina na discuss ko isa-isa. But wait, ladies and gentlemen, pag the-pure sinabi niya nung unang panahon that boys don't cry, nakikita na natin sa mga pelikula ngayon, boys cry! John Lloyd Cruz cries! I think this is in si Basha at saka si Juanito. Si Basha at saka si Popoy. Umiiyak din si Joshua Garcia. So even media, even entertainment, they are one in us, in a manner of speaking, in saying that it is okay for boys to cry. Next one. There's a Magna Carta for Women, VAUSI, International Women's Day, and the use of binary language. Magna Carta for Women, ito ay isang dokumento na nagsasabi na nakalasaad dito ang mga karapatan ng mga kababaihan to eliminate discrimination. How? We recognize the women, we protect them, okay, we promote their right to stay Filipino women. Why is it called Magna Carta of Women? Because there's a sense of ownership. It is made by women for women. Pag sinabi kasi natin Magna Carta for Women, ang sinasabi natin dito, ito ay ginawa para sa kababaihan. Sino gumawa? Basta ginawa ito para sa kanila. When we say Magna Carta on Women, we just want to say that this is a document about women. But when we say Magna Carta of Women, the women help craft this Magna Carta. The women help craft this law. They own it, they possess it, and they are a part of its production. That is why it's called Magna Carta of Women. VAUSI, there is now a desk in every police station. There's a women help desk, especially for VAUSI's violence against women and children. Okay? Bawal, napakalaking bawal ang maging violente against a woman na asawa, dating asawa, girlfriend, kabit, okay? Against that woman, against yung anak ng babae yon, legal man, legitimate or illegitimate, sa loob man o sa labas ng bahay, okay? Which would result in physical abuse, nabugbog, sexual abuse, rape, psychological harm, na-apekto ng kanyang mental health, o economic abuse, walang suporta, walang sustento. Lahat ng ito ay sakop ng VAUSI Act. Remember, there's a Violence Against Women and Children Act. Next one, International Women's Day is celebrated to toast to the cultural, political, and socio-economic achievements of women. Why is there no International Men's Day? Because, sa tingin ko lang, ang nangyayari kasi, every day is International Men's Day. Kasi yun yung nangyayari sa society natin. There's an International Women's Day to celebrate the beauty and the wonders of womanhood. Then we have gender-sensitive communication and gender-fair language, which uses language that avoids bias towards a particular sex or gender, and therefore is less likely to convey stereotypes. Ngayon, anong ginagawa ng gender-sensitive communication and gender-fair language? There are now people who do not wish to be addressed as him or he, or she or her. Ang ginagawa ko in a general sense is I use the term them or their. Them as a direct object, and there as a possessive. Okay? Next one. Sa buong mundo, sa mundo ng pandemya, pinasasaglakan natin ngayon, most of the countries that were able to address heads-on the COVID-19 pandemic are Germany, Taiwan, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Denmark, and these are led by women. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I leave it at that, that the countries that were able to fight immediately or to do something immediately against the pandemic are countries that are led by women. Hindi lang lalaki ang kayang magbuhat ng napakabigat. Ayan si Heidi Diaz. Buhay na testigo, na saksi. Okay? That women can also carry heavy burdens. Ang lola, si Lola Flora ng Provinciano. Okay? Lola Flora Provinciano is there to remind us, okay, that women are nurturing, women are tender, but she can be tough as well. She can be aggressive as well. Another image is that of Dr. Jill Ilustre dito sa inabangan ko the broken marriage vow. You see her soft spot. You see her suffer, but she's also tough. She's also firm. Kung inabangan nyo, episode 38 na mga kapatid. You know that? Jody Santa Maria is a very fine actress. Makita mo lang yung mukha niya, isang tingin mo lang sa kanya, nakikita mo that she embodies the women who are strong. That women are strong. Okay? King Wang dito sa Genshin, she started out as a market vendor selling fish and wares day in and day out until she became the embodiment of wealth herself through hard work and wit. I don't know if there are some of you students who can relate to this one. I have to ask a certain student of mine, sabihin mo sa akin sa inyong Genshin or Mobile Legends or League of Legends, are there strong woman characters there? And this is what I was given, Ningguang. Okay. Gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, is the challenge. Why is the term there today? Because it has to happen today. It does not mean it should not happen tomorrow. It has to happen today. It has to start today. Why? Because for us to have a sustainable tomorrow. What is a sustainable development? When we advance in society without destroying our natural resources. When there is a certain progress that meets the needs of the present time without sacrificing the future generations to meet their own needs. Ito yung sinasabi natin sustainable tomorrow. For sustainable development, we need to empower women to promote gender equality because they play a very crucial role in accelerating sustainable development. Malaki ang role ng mga kababaihan, okay, in promoting and accelerating sustainable development. Therefore, we need to end all forms of discrimination against women and girls because it is not only a basic human right, but has a multiplier effect across all other development areas. If we end all forms of discrimination, we empower women and girls, we say that we are all in this together. Who will empower women and girls? Boys and men should empower women and girls. Okay? Why do we say that boys and men? Because women and girls are already empowering each other. The image of Mother Earth, which is nurturing. Bakit sa Mother Earth? Kung minsan, if you look into the internet, ang Mother Earth, meron siyang hawak na malaking globo dito sa kanyang chat. As if she were pregnant, taking care of us. Okay? Taking care of us. Nurturing. That is why when we work for gender development, when we work for gender equality, all aspects of our being and existence are affected. Physical, social, cultural, political, economic, psychological, spiritual, environmental. Lahat-lahat yan. Ang gender equality, our push for gender equality will become the impetus. Okay? It will become the pushing force so that all of this will happen. Because we are all in this together. Hindi pwede maiwan ang bawat isa. We are all this. We are in one big boat traveling towards a certain direction. What is that direction? That direction, according to our theme today, is sustainable tomorrow, sustainable development. That is our end, that is our goal. But before we could achieve that, what we should do is we have to make things we have to facilitate to make easy the things, okay, that we are currently, or to address the things that we're currently facing, so that we could easily achieve a sustainable tomorrow. How can we do that? It's gender equality. It's avoiding gender bias. It's calling out people. If we see that if they are discriminating against a certain gender. It's being aware of VAUSI. It's celebrating International Women's Day, International Women's Month. And it is in making International Women's Day not only celebrated on March or March 8th for that matter. It's celebrating womanhood every day of our lives because we get exposed, even if all of us are exposed to each other. Okay, there is no community that is made up only of men and boys. The society is made up of both men and boys and men and women and girls. There's a sense of collaboration, a cooperation between men and women, girls and boys. Magtutulungan niya mga yan. Hindi pwede isa lamang muna. The image of all of us holding hands and together trekking the same path. Will there be trails that will be blazed? Will there be new trails? Will we serve as pioneers, for example, towards new paths? Yes, perhaps. Why not? Because gender equality is not a new thing. Gender equality is not a new thing. It has been with us for so long time now. The advocacy has been with us for so long time now. But the thing is, we can only we are unconsciously participating, perhaps, in discrimination. O yung mga Marites, anong bago? Yun pa lang. Yun pa lang, hindi natin alam. Nagtatawanan tayo. O yung Marites, yun pa lang, hindi natin alam, we are contributing to gender inequality. Yun pa lang pag napadapa yung kapatid mo, lalala, o wag kang umiyak, lalaki kayo, ano ka ba? Wipe your tears. We're contributing to that. And perhaps we do not be aware of it at all. That is why there is a need for us to be gender sensitive. Okay? Because at the end, gentlemen, we are all. Okay? Okay? So I think later on there will be an open forum. Mamor or so my closing statement, ladies and gentlemen, is we cannot ignore the need for gender equality. It is not actually a need. It's not a need. It's an imperative. It is something that we should do. It's not only a need that has to be satisfied. It is something that is inherent in us. It is something that is inherent in us. Men or women, girls or boys, or anything in the gender mixture, in gender-bread man, all of us are participants. All of us are participants in promoting gender equality today, so that we could achieve a sustainable tomorrow. Because in the theme today, we see here that gender equality is not the end. It's one end perhaps, but is also an instrument towards the attainment of a sustainable tomorrow. Parang kung yun eh. This is not a very good analogy, but parang paggawa yan ng fried rice. Before you could produce fried rice, you have to cook steamed rice first. Okay? The fried rice is the sustainable tomorrow. Gender equality is the steamed rice. Now, what happens to the steamed rice? It has to be cooked well. It has to be prepared well. Because if it is not, pag hindi maganda pagkaluto mo sa steamed rice, hindi mo maaabot yung gusto mong mangyayari sa fried rice. I'm sorry, it's not a very good analogy, but I hope you get the image, that gender equality, as it is even an end in itself, would contribute greatly to the attainment or achievement of a sustainable tomorrow. Magagawa ba natin makakamit ba natin ang sustainable development kapag walang gender equality? Who knows? Probably, pero matagal. Matagal because ang gender inequality ay nagsisilbing balakid. It is a stumbling block towards our achievement of a sustainable community, sustainable society, a sustainable world. What do we mean when we say sustainable? It is advancement without depletion of natural resources. It is the development that meets the needs. Yung ginagawa din natin, it is a certain move towards progress without sacrificing so much, so that those who will be in the generations after us would still enjoy the fruits that we are enjoying at the moment. Perhaps we can say na, matagal ka naman yan, patay na ako by that time. Oh no. Oh no, you cannot say that. You cannot say that. Because whatever we do today will have a great impact. Will have a great impact of whatever happens in the future. Every little thing that we do leaves a mark, leaves an indelible mark on what happens later on. You understand that? Okay? Is it already my time? Ma'am moderator?
Yes, sir, you can wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much. So ang sinasabi ko dito is, we have to break the bias. As we end this seminar later on today, we come up with a totally new perspective. We come up with a totally new perspective, an appreciation of the kind of behavior perhaps, or behavior attitude that we have perhaps, or the way that we deal with other people. That let us keep an open mind in the way that we treat other people. Itindihin natin sila, and we acknowledge that we are not the only ones living in this world. Universe rather, that gender equality, even as it is an end in itself, can be a tool, an instrument, a bridge in our achievement of a sustainable tomorrow, a sustainable world, a sustainable universe. Yan lamang po. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat. And I think I will see you during the open forum much later on.
Martina? Asan si Miss Martina?
Hello po.
Nawala yat. Ayan.
Medyo ano lang po, yung internet ko. Okay. Thank you very much to our first speaker from Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, Professor Sherwin at Jerry Paul V. Saquing. Naririnig po ba ako?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Thank you po. Okay, so before we proceed with our second speaker for today, let us have our photo opportunity. Inaanyayahan po na ang lahat ay buksan ang kanilang camera for our picture taking.
Sir Josh?
Okay, please turn on your cameras po. And we have 5 slides po, kaya 5 sunod-sunod na stay lang yung pagngiti. Okay. First slide po. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Smile. Second slide. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Smile. Third slide po. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fourth slide. And then fifth slide. Okay na po. Thank you po.
And now to introduce to us our second speaker for today, let us have our newly designated Gender and Development Head, none other than Professor Iona Ofelia B. Zanon.
Thank you so much, Martina. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay po. Okay po. Good morning to each and everyone. Good morning to the Executive Director and Provost, Dr. Leia Amor S. Cortez, to our Dean for Academics and PLE, Dr. Amor F. Lunisa, and to the OIC for Finance and Administration, Engineer Dandy Suryo, and to all the campus officials, faculty, staff, and students who are here right now. It is an honor for me to introduce our guest speaker for this morning. So, he is a full-time instructor in the College of Graduate Studies and Teacher Education Research, or CGSTER, and an adjunct faculty of the Faculty of Science, Technology, and Mathematics, or FSTEM, of Philippine Normal University. He finished his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry for Teachers at the Philippine Normal University and obtained his straight Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy in Biochemistry degree at the University of the Philippines, Manila in 2017. He has served as a trainer in the National Training of Teachers of the K-12 curriculum, spearheaded by the National Institute for Science and Mathematics, University of the Philippines, Diliman, in partnership with the Department of Education. In the field of biochemistry, his main lines of interest include genomics, proteomics, and bioinformatics. His dissertation focused on mutation profiling and gene expression analysis of drugs susceptible and resistant Mycobacterium tuberculosis in collaboration with the Lung Center of the Philippines and the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the University of the Philippines, Manila. His graduate studies and dissertation were funded by the Accelerated Science and Technology Human Resource Development Program, or ASTHRDP, through the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, Department of Science and Technology, under the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, wherein he is the pioneer graduate of straight MS PhD in Biochemistry program. He served as resource speaker in numerous seminars, workshops, and conferences on pedagogy and contextualization in science education. He also delivers lectures through the Philippine Society of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, wherein teachers, researchers, and scientists are equipped with pedagogical strategies in teaching biochemistry and molecular biology in secondary and tertiary level. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome our speaker, Dr. Christ John Mejia Pastor.
Okay, so thank you very much, ma'am. Can you hear me? And naririnig po ninyo ako? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, okay. Sige po. So, I would like to express my warm good morning to everybody, especially to our provost, to the administrators who are with us this time. The faculty members po, magandang umaga. Ma'am Brenda, who invited me here, and as well as our students, of course, and to our first speaker who shared his thoughts on in line with God, no, or the gender equality issues. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. So let me just share my screen because I think medyo short, tama ba 'yun? Medyo short lang naman ang presentation ko for today. So here. Teka lang po ha. So can you see now what's on my screen?
Yes, sir.
Ayan, the PowerPoint presentation. Ayan po. And then later on na lang po magche-check na lang tayo ng audio if you can hear what I'm saying. So for today, I'm going to share something about gender equality in mitigating the impacts of climate change. Since there are so many references that we can get online, and those are reliable references, most of them coming from NASA, coming from other institutions. What I did was actually to compile them together and share with you today, what is it, that what are the things that we currently have, the updates that we have in climate change. And at the same time, thinking that most of us are teachers naman talaga, or we will be teachers. So kailangan natin itong makita, how grabe na ba talaga yung impacts on climate change. So we will just, I'm going to share it with you today. Okay? Sige po. So Magandang umaga po ulit. So let us set the preliminaries first, or let's talk about basic things first. So when we talk about climate change, the definition is quite straightforward. This is a change in climate. You know, that climate is a long-term atmospheric condition that a certain geographical area or geographical position on the planet experiences. So when we say climate change, as you can see in our screen, it refers to the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. So your basic sciences would somehow tell you that climate is really different from weather, that weather can change from time to time. And these shifts may be natural, or otherwise anthropogenic. So let us now look at some of the possible natural causes or sources wherein the climate change might occur. And we are actually, by this time, climate change can be global warming or cooling, no? Pero syempre ang problem natin currently is the global warming issue. So the variations in solar cycle, for example, the picture that you see on the right is taken from the NASA Extreme Ultraviolet Telescope. And you can see by just direct observation or inspection, you can see that the activity of the sun is actually declining. No? So, but it doesn't decline through time naman consistently. So sometimes tumataas yan or bumababa. And you know that the heat coming from the sun is the major source of energy for the planet. At the same time, whenever we have too much of that, of course, the global temperatures will also be affected. So sabi nga dito, no, parang in some of the studies that are posted in the net, no, through these websites, they said that as early as 2010, the solar brightness since 2005 has been slightly lower. And so nakaka-experience tayo ng lesser amount of irradiance coming from the sun. Okay? So with that, can I see a raised hand or a thumbs up na nasusundan ba ito so that I can see kung naiintindihan ito ng mga audience natin. So from time to time, I would request you to somehow interact with me so that kasi boring naman kung nanonood lang kayo na parang nag-webinar na lang tayo. Maraming salamat po sa mga to nag-respond. Okay, so let us now proceed. This is what I'm saying, no, that aside from the solar effects, meron din tayong mga ilan pang possible na reasons why the global temperatures could fluctuate. For example, whenever they observe that whenever there is a parang massive or enormous na volcanic eruptions. For example, here in this graph, you can see that the temperature anomaly of our atmosphere tends to become more pronounced whenever there is an eruption. No, there's an eruption of a volcano. Siguro naman sa lahat ng ito, ang pinaka-common sa atin ay yung Pinatubo, no? So naka-contribute din naman ang ating Mount Pinatubo sa global cooling or dun sa rise in temperature anomaly of the stratosphere when it erupted during 1991. Okay? So that somehow emphasizes that it is not always the things that we give to the planet or we release to the atmosphere that causes the global warming or whatever. Just like this one, it's cooling. And just to justify or to support this claim that the changes in the global climate has occurred so many times, several times in the history. So in this picture, you can see parang it is a span of 11,000 years. No, for the past 11,000 years, there had been a rise or an observed or marked rise and dip in the temperature of the planet. So it just so happened that in our time, in our currently, ang problem natin is tumataas talaga yung temperature. So does that mean that we don't have to blame ourselves or feel very sorry or concerned about this? Actually, it doesn't spare us from that idea. Why? Because aside from the natural causes, dito na nga pumapasok yung tinatawag natin na anthropogenic sources. What are those? Now, these are the chemicals, the compounds that we release into the atmosphere that somehow changes its chemistry, such that whenever some of those gases that alter the atmosphere of the planet are present in higher concentrations or concentrations which are higher than what is acceptable to or acceptable to be there, yun na nagkakaroon na tayo ng unprecedented effects to our global temperatures. Okay po. So let's now proceed to the next. So before we proceed, na parang kasi in the Philippines, we are used to having a dry and a wet season. No, yun lang naman na nakikita natin. But of course, when you look at the literatures and when you look at, for example, videos, you can search for so many resources that somehow supports the idea that global warming is real. No, it's real. Although sa atin, baka ang translation ng nito sa atin ay mas mainit ngayon kumpara nung dati. Okay? So let us watch this video first so that you could have a better idea of what's going on. Let me just check this. Pakisabi lang po sa akin kung naririnig po ninyo yung audio. Can you hear the audio?
No audio, sir.
Walang
No
audio. Sige po, sandali Mag-stop share po ako. And I'll share this again. Ayan. Let's try it again. Ito po. Can you hear it now?
Okay na po, sir.
Okay na po. Salamat. Okay. So let's watch this video.
The Arctic, an ancient ecosystem, is disappearing before our eyes. Disruptive heat-related impacts driven by unrelenting human-caused climate change are happening throughout the polar north. In Siberia, unusually warm air temperatures led to early snow and sea ice melt, followed by another active wildfire season. Rain was seen for the first time on the 10,000-foot summit of the Greenland ice cap. Destructive geological forces unleashed by thawing permafrost and melting land ice are an increasing threat to the homes and livelihoods of Arctic residents. These changes are not isolated. Each one can have a cascading effect, some amplifying warming and further accelerating climate change. Arctic sea ice has been in a decades-long decline. Older, thicker sea ice that once covered the central Arctic Ocean is now almost entirely gone. This has enabled shipping and other industrial activities to push deeper into the Arctic year-round, resulting in more pollution and more noise in the ocean. During winter in the Bering Sea, the vocalizations marine mammals use to hunt and communicate create an almost rainforest-like soundscape. Shipping noise can drown out these calls, potentially driving marine mammals away from their preferred habitat and raising concern for the food security of indigenous hunters and their families. Increased shipping in the Arctic is leading to more fishing nets, plastics, garbage, and hazardous materials lost or illegally discarded into the ocean. Alaska Native communities reported many miles of their once pristine beaches and harvesting sites fouled by garbage. The Arctic is becoming greener. Tundra vegetation is flourishing, and shrubs and small trees are spreading into new territory. Iconic Arctic animals are losing habitat, while new species are moving in and changing ecosystems. In Alaska, exploding beaver populations are transforming the tundra. More than 12,000 dams are clogging streams, flooding surrounding terrain, and facilitating the invasion of more new species. New ponds cause underlying permafrost to thaw and release more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Thawing of permafrost and melting glacial ice also creates special hazards for northern residents, ranging from crumbling homes and infrastructure to extraordinarily dangerous geological events like glacial outburst floods and avalanche-triggered tsunamis. With continued warming, Identifying and assessing these hazards is just one of many urgent tasks facing Arctic scientists today. All these disruptions are the direct results of a climate straining under the heat-trapping burden of greenhouse gas pollution. The time to face this monumental challenge is now.
Okay, so those are the the things that we can somehow see. Ay, by the way, dahil kakabalik ko po sa audio, can you hear me? Naririnig niyo po ako ng maayos?
Yes, sir.
Yes, maraming salamat po. So nakita natin na parang ganun ka grabe yung devastation whenever we have this global warming. It is not only just thinning of those ice sheets, no, yung mga permafrost nasisira na. At the same time, so para sa iba, no, maganda ba na nag-expand yung forest? Is that a good thing? When we consider that respiration also occurs in plants, that's what your science is saying. And whenever the plant respires, they also emit carbon dioxide, which we will talk about later. And the more plants that we have in the planet, I'm not saying na putulin ng mga trees, pero tama lang yan na nandyan sila. But the more plants that invade those areas, because the ice that which were previously there have melted already, no, mas marami yung emitters natin ng carbon dioxide, especially during the winter time. So yun yung nagiging mag-a-add yan sa ating global problems later on. So aside from that, no, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration mentioned in one of their posts that the February 2022 temperature is actually the 7th warmest record that we had. And in the article, they said that there has been an increase of 1.51 degrees, no, dito sa temperature na measure nila during the February 2022 as compared to other records that we had in the past. So ito po yung mga binabantayan natin, ano. So it seems that the planet is somehow breaking its record time and time again. So hopefully yung human intervention can actually be good, but up to what extent can that be effective? Because sometimes when things combine together, meron tayo mga times na nagkakaroon tayo ng point of no escape, that whatever we do, hindi na natin mahahabol yung effects ng climate change. Okay? So let me just proceed to the next. And there are other climate anomalies which have been reported. I think this is coming from the same reference, but I would like to zoom that in. So here in Asia, for example, the Western and the Northern Asia had much warmer than average conditions. And that's why they are saying that most of the typhoons that we have are stronger right now. You in your earth sciences or in your integrated science, it could have been discussed that whenever there is an increase in the temperature of the ocean, no, yung mainit na yung pag-init ng mga oceans natin, that somehow drives the formation of the typhoons. And because of this global warming, of course, this is something that we expect. No, so it's not only because of the enhanced evaporation that occurs on land, no, but it is more of the increase in temperature in the water, in the bodies of water. And in your physics, it is mentioned that since water can keep most of the heat, that it can actually store the heat for a long time. And if you heat the ocean, even 1 degree Celsius or 1 Celsius degree na difference could be kept for a long time. And that could sustain more or stronger typhoons in effect. So in other countries, you see that it's also true that for most of the Arctic and Antarctic areas, nagkakaroon naman sila ng melting of ice. Okay? So ito na yung parang uso ngayon, no? Ito na yung mga lagi nating nakikita. And I just hope that sometimes if we are too familiar with these things, it somehow makes us careless. No, it makes us careless. So kasi lagi mo na siyang naririnig. But if you're a teacher, actually, you have to keep track of these things. And we have to communicate this to our students very well. Okay, so let's now proceed to the next. So what's with anthropogenic sources? Of course, it is said here in the slide that since 1800s, our activities has been the main driver of climate change, because we have this very high dependence on coal. on oil and gas, and the common denominator, or these are actually subsets of what we say fossil fuels. Now we call them fossil fuels. We know that fossil fuels come from the remains of the animals and other organisms which contain carbon for a very long time, like millions of years underneath the ground, and even in the oceans they exist. And when we mine them and we burn them, we combine this carbon through combustion, the reaction of combustion with oxygen, thus producing some gases that we will be of concern, or we will be concerned about later on. So you see that burning fossil fuels, no matter what kind of hydrocarbon is that, no, in your chemistry, balikan natin yung chemistry ninyo. So the methane would be the simplest hydrocarbon that we can think about. And when you burn that in the presence of oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide and water. It's always like that. And even if you use, for example, propane or kerosene or gasoline, all of these are hydrocarbons. The octane that is present in gasolines, di ba? Octane number nga ang tinitingnan niyo dyan kung cleaner ba siya o hindi. Basta nag-burn ka, no, it's really inevitable that carbon dioxide and water will be produced. And what about that? So what? No, parang since grade school alam na natin 'yan. We know that carbon dioxide is produced through combustion, but aside from that, we have to take note that carbon dioxide is a potent absorber of infrared radiation, not UV, but infrared radiation. So the infrared radiation is actually a form of yun nga napaperceive natin yan as heat, ano, and the more infrared radiation that is trapped in the atmosphere, of course, it is also being felt by the planet, and it increases the temperature of our planet. So you see, in the chemistry's perspective, carbon dioxide is a very stable gas. No, it's a very stable gas. That's why it can stand alone. It does not necessarily react with anything except whenever your enzymes in the body somehow incorporates it with other things. No, pero let alone, siya ay napaka-stable. And that stability is very good, but at the same time, it could also mean that carbon dioxide cannot be easily degraded. It can't be lost in the atmosphere for a very long time. And when we add more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, nagtatapos siya doon. The double bonds that are present in your the molecule of carbon dioxide, once that they receive or they absorb infrared radiation, they tend to nakikita nyo naman sa picture, di ba? They tend to jiggle, no? They tend to jiggle, and that excites the molecule, no? And then after some time, it also releases the same. So naiintindihan po ba ito yung concept na to, that this carbon dioxide can actually trap the infrared radiation na sana nilalabas na natin sa out of the planet during afternoon or evening, para naman maging ready tayo for the next cycle of absorbance during the day. So can I see a raised hand if you understand this concept? This concept is very important. Why? Because sa lahat po ng mga greenhouse gases na makikita natin, the absorbance of energy, infrared radiation, is one of the most common theme. Ayan po. So malinaw po ba ito? So can I see how about our students? Naiintindihan ba itong yung concept na yan? So isang bagay na dapat natin tandaan, so the more carbon dioxide that's present in the atmosphere, syempre the higher the global temperatures become. And this figure somehow provides us a better picture of what's happening. Now, the fossil fuels, burning fossil fuel is not the only source of your carbon dioxide in release. So yung nagre-release ng carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's also because of some burning, no? For example, kaingin. Familiar po siguro kayo sa kaingin. Ano po ang term ninyo sa inyong lugar para sa kaingin o yung pagbo-burn ng forest? Do you use the same term?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you use the same term. Maraming salamat po. Ayan, sige po. Ito si Sir Jeff, nagtaas ng kamay. Sir Jeff, hello. Ayan, baka you would like to say the same thing. Sige po. And also, meron din tayong tinatawag, syempre, kung may nagre-release, meron din naman nag-absorb. We call them the sinks, of course. And pag sinabi nating sink, these are components of the planet naman wherein they tend to acquire carbon dioxide and somehow contributes to the decrease of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, for example, the land, yung mga halaman, of course, they use it for photosynthesis as a raw material. and of even the the carbon dioxide in water, no? So mga oceans, so essentially the planet is surrounded by lots of water, and those ocean systems and even the other types of or bodies of water can get that. One thing that we can learn from chemistry is that the gases, no, the solubility of gases tend to increase whenever the temperature decreases. Can you follow that? Pag mas malamig ang temperatura, mas nadidissolve ang mga gases sa water or sa any liquid that they can be dissolved into. So, do you see now the problem? Whenever there is a global warming, no, pag mataas ang temperatura ng planeta, mataas ang temperatura ng tubig, the role of those oceans and those bodies of water to become sinks of carbon dioxide will also be lesser. Hindi masyadong nag-absorb ng hindi masyadong magdi-dissolve yung natin, yung carbon dioxide natin and other gases dito sa bodies of water pag mainit siya. Okay? So kaya nga parang sanga-sanga ang problem na yan. And one thing that we know, okay, so I would like to show this first, this video first. So when we look at the global fossil emissions of the planet, of the human activities, we can see here that it is actually increasing through time. It's increasing through time, and at the same time, yung temperature din ng ating globe ay tumataas, no? So there could be some dents there. For example, the Paris Agreement, whenever there are some interventions that we apply or that we subscribe to, no, mga international agreements na magbawas tayo ng carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, those are good. But of course, as sinasabi ko nga kanina, no, parang it will not definitely or perfectly cancel the problem, the existing problem, as if that it was about like 1960s or some years earlier. Here in the other figure on the right naman, you can see the violet dot, the larger violet dot that you see there is the Philippines. No, it's the Philippines. So this data is 2021, and it says here the annual change in fossil carbon dioxide territorial emissions. There is in the graph. So let's look at the graph. This is 0. This is the baseline, okay, or the average of the countries. So pag nasa taas yung dots natin, they are increasing their emissions through time. Kapag nasa baba naman ay nagde-decrease. The green dot here is actually blue and green. That's the Earth. So that's the global average. That's the global average. So you see that our country during 1996 to 2000, mataas ang ating emissions, ano? And then after some time, we are somehow effective in terms of implementing some programs or rules. Sana magtuloy yan. O ito na. So bumababa naman ang ating emissions. But during the 2011-2015, there had been a rise. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, medyo bumababa siya. Hopefully, after the pandemic, ma-sustain natin yung ganitong level, if not lower. No, if not make it lower. So let me just look or give you some idea about, of course, this calls for some math. No, but simple lang naman ito. No, these are when we talk about concentrations, when we talk about masses or the amount of gases in the atmosphere, hindi naman kaila ito, no, that we are talking about a very huge or large quantities. So we have here the gigaton, no, it's 1 billion tons, or which is also equivalent to 1 petagram, they said. And of course, we know that we are very familiar with this, with this unit, kilogram. Pero do not be surprised that you will see like GT, no, gigaton ang ibig sabihin nito. So when we look at the anthropogenic perturbation, what does that mean? In the Earth has its own global carbon cycle, but because of human influences and activities, nababago natin siya. Okay? So let us now look at here. No, for example, fossil carbon dioxide use and land use change. For example, yung mga kaingin natin, sila yung common na nagbibigay or nagre-release. And then the biosphere, for example, the presence of the vegetation or plants, nagde-decrease yan ng carbon dioxide, and also the oceans, no? And then other things that you can get. But if what they're saying is, what do those arrows somehow represent? No, they give you the idea na yung balance. No, there should be a balance between these two. Pero apparently, mas marami tayong na-emit kesa sa na nakukuha ng mga sinks natin, ng carbon dioxide sinks. That's why we can see the observed increase through time. Okay? So it's a gigaton of carbon dioxide per year. No, yung numbers na nakikita niyo dyan. Okay, so let's proceed now. So here are the things. Because when I was requested to talk about this, sabi nga daw yung mga current updates. So you see that most of the time, the developing countries, which are most of them are concentrated in Asia, in Africa, for example, mas marami sa kanila ang highly dependent on fossil fuels, no? Fossil fuels. And that's why their emissions, when you look at the emission, this is the highest range of this graph is 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Since 2020, since 1960 going to 2020, nakita natin na super taas, tumataas talaga yung amount natin. Why? I'm going to give you an idea on the next slide. So you see here that the concentration of the carbon dioxide increases. This somehow supports what I'm saying a while ago. So ano ang ppm? So for sa mga nagte-take ng chemistry courses before, ppm is parts per million, no? Parts per million. And there had been a 49% increase on the concentration of carbon dioxide since 1750 to 2021. So yun napansin niyo, dumoble yung amount ng carbon dioxide natin. And mahirap ngayon itong i-guarantee na ma-stop natin yan because we are still pursuing or going towards urbanization, di ba? And industrialization. And you see here that in terms of the global fossil carbon dioxide emissions, makikita natin na the COVID-19 pandemic that we had caused some effects on the usage of fuels. For example, yung mga travel through by plane, yung mga tawag dito, yung by land, yung gumagamit ng gasolina, hindi nakakapagtrabaho yung mga tao sa industries, of course. And of course, yung fossil fuels na binuburn natin is more on electricity generation lang. So bumagsak siya ng 5.4%, but as of the projection 2021 going to 2022, baka siya ay umangat ulit, tumaas ulit. And when you look at the different countries, parang sa atin nga yung all others except for China, USA, Europe, and India, sa atin talaga tayo yung major contributor. Pero when you look at the Philippines is very small as compared to other countries which are all combined for all the others clause. 'Di ba? Yung all others na yan. So ibig sabihin, hindi naman sa Philippines yung talagang pinaka nagpo-produce niyan. Kasi nga napansin natin sa trend kanina na bumababa naman ang ating emissions through time. But of course, as more of these developing countries become industrialized, the more that they depend on fossil fuels. That's why the carbon emissions will also be projected to be higher. Okay? So I think this is the same thing. And naidagdag lang dyan yung cement. So by source, in terms of source, yun nga yung coal, next is the oil, next is gas and cement. So ito yung and kung papansinin ninyo, whenever a certain country becomes more industrialized, the more that they rely on cement. Siyempre, kasi gumagawa na sila ng mga building, gumagawa sila ng facilities, infrastructures, di ba? So, ibig sabihin the more that we depend on these things, ayan na. So, the carbon dioxide emissions become higher. And for other countries which are quite well off than us, they are now starting on different or alternative sources of energy. The Philippines is quite blessed because we have so much of these resources. Tama? Siguro lang yung reliability lang ng resources na yan. Kasi syempre sa ibang provinces, if they subscribe to this kind of alternative energy resources, and then meron silang mga di ba, may mga brownout sila, ganyan, na naka-schedule, sometimes unanticipated. Kaya hindi talaga natin mapalitan yung fossil fuels. But hopefully later on we can somehow find some effective and efficient replacements. Other countries are using, for example, nuclear power plants. We have that and it's still in progress kung anong magiging fate niya, kung matutuloy or hindi. and also other things like windmills. No, we have hydroelectric power plants and geothermal. So ang Pilipinas, marami tayo niyan. They are parang just waiting to be developed. And one thing that is very important, no, tignan natin itong mabuti. Whenever there's a developing country, most of the products that the entire world uses come from those countries. So for example, the manufacturing companies are in China. The manufacturing companies are coming, most of them are being yung assembly lines, na yung mga assembly lines. It has something to do with social construct that when you look at those countries, mas mababa ang bayad sa kanilang labor. That's why most of the assembly lines are in the Asian countries, in the developing countries, but the consumption of those goods are being used by other countries. No, so nakita nyo ngayon. That's why we cannot also blame the developing countries to be the top contributors to pollutants. Kasi nga, syempre sa kanila yung dirty work ng paggawa at pag-assemble ng mga products na ginagamit naman ng ibang bansa. Okay? So, and at the same time, when you look at the magnitude of this, na parang, sige, so you have all those products being assembled in one place, and when you transport them to another, you are also using and burning fuels. This has something to do also with the another slide like this, na when you look at the extraction of oil, of gas, of those fossil fuel-based derivatives, all of them are being are concentrated more or less in some parts of the world and being used by others. So ito yung sinasabi natin na that those transfers are very important to be considered. So far, are you still there? Can I see a raised hand kung nandyan pa kayo? Still listening? Naka-tune in pa po ba kayo? Kamusta? So nakita natin na hindi ito yung simple lang na umiinit ang earth, hindi lang yun. No, if that is what you think, if that is what you're thinking right now, you have a problem, no? Mas malaki dito sa nakikita natin. So maraming salamat po sa nagtaas ng kamay. And then let's proceed. So ano ngayon ang mangyayari? Sabi nga natin, parang if there are sources, there should be sinks. We have to look at some possibilities wherein those sinks could be developed. No? Kung hindi man natin madagdagan, huwag na nating bawasan. No? So those are the forests, for example, the oceans that we have, and the sinks. Let me just tell you something. If oceans and the bodies of water become saturated with other solutes, this is what the chemistry would tell you. Marami kang nilagay dyan, nagtapon ka ng kung ano-anong substances dyan. How come that it could still accommodate those gases that it should absorb, like carbon dioxide and other gases, like oxygen that supports marine life? It cannot do that anymore, di ba? So may tinatawag tayo na saturation points, and that is what your chemistry tells you. So that's why, parang if you keep polluting oceans, you are also giving an impact or having an impact on the atmosphere as well. Sabi nga nila, everything is related. So let us now look at the remaining carbon budget. No, so the remaining carbon budget to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.7 and 2% are present in here. Okay? So nakita natin, parang ayaw natin sanang umakyat yung global temperature natin ng 1.5, 1.7 or 2 degrees. Imagine nyo yun kung gaano kainit yan, no? Yung room temp mo ngayon plus 2 degrees, no? It's too much. So we need to somehow maintain these numbers, no? Like 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year para lang hindi na tayo umakyat dito sa 1.5 degrees na ito, because there's a use of respectively here. And they are projecting this from 11, 20, and 32 years from 2022. So we are already in 2022. Dapat ma-maintain natin yung 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide or less para hindi na tayo umakyat ng 1.5 degrees after 11 years, no? Or as compared to 1750 rates. So this is a very challenging concern. So what's up with carbon dioxide? You will always say that greenhouse effect is always carbon dioxide is always attributed to the greenhouse effect. That's true. But let us take note that the greenhouse effect is not always bad. No, it makes the planet livable. Why? Because without an atmosphere that which contains carbon dioxide in essence, 'di ba? There would be an abrupt changes in our temperature day and night. No, yun yung problema natin. And whenever the greenhouse effect is present or is at work, somehow it normalizes the temperature, no? So pag umaga nag-absorb ang planeta natin ng init, at kapag tuwing hapon at gabi, kailangan sa ilang areas ng planeta dapat na ano natin yon, na-release natin into the outer space. But the carbon dioxide tends to and other greenhouse gases tends to get a share of those infrared radiation or heat na tinatawag ninyo or na-perceive ninyo, kasi nga para naman ma-maintain yung global temperature. Ang problem natin diyan kapag sobra na. Okay, so you see here in this figure that the sun tends to provide the solar radiation, but we have to radiate that. And because of the carbon dioxide that's present, for example, human respiration, animal respiration, all of this, plant respiration, especially during winter, ayan. So nagkakaroon tayo ng trapping of that heat for a while, no? But of course, kapag pinakailaman natin yan, o nagawa na natin actually, nag-industrialize na tayo and so on, ayan. So dumadami na yung mga greenhouse gases. One of them is carbon dioxide kasi yun yung kaya nating i-control. The question now is, yun lang ba ang pwede nating i-control? Actually, yung susunod kong ipapakita sa inyo, medyo mas mahirap. But naturally, we are quite happy or lucky that it has or it is involved in a cycle. Whenever you burn fossil fuels, you don't only produce carbon dioxide, you also produce water. And in your physics, you know that water has this high heat capacity. No, nag-absorb siya ng heat. And water is also always present in what you call hydrologic cycle in the planet. That's why water vapor is also a potent. It's not that potent, pero sa sobrang dami niya, no, in the air or in the atmosphere, nakaka-contribute siya sa warming ng ating planeta. So in the picture, you can see here that water molecules are capable of producing hydrogen bonds or having hydrogen bonds between them. That those hydrogen bonds are really hard to break. No, those are hard to break, and they tend to absorb more energy before you break them. The water molecule by itself, no, or maybe because wala naman siyang double bond so hindi yan masyadong nag-absorb yan ng IR, sure yun, for sure, nag-absorb siya ng IR. But it's not only because of that molecule, but the magnitude or yung volume ng molecules na nandoon, because water is always in the atmosphere. So sabi nga dito, air can contain 0.1% to 5% of water. And that is enough to somehow alter the temperature of the planet. So clouds form from water vapor, reflect light from the sun, and have a temperature lowering effect. So whenever the clouds are present, so tinatamaan siya ng light coming from the sun, na reflect sila. But aside from that, or apart from that, of course, syempre, water vapor can also parang absorb IR. So yun naman yung another thing that we have to talk about. So we are already through with this too. Now, carbon dioxide and water. Let's proceed. There are other molecules that you might have encountered in your chemistry class that are very important when we are talking about greenhouse effect. So let me introduce to you some of your friends, enemies. This is methane. You're familiar with this, and this is nitrous oxide, and the blue balls there, are nitrogen, and then one oxygen molecule or atom, and then you have the CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. Let us take note that yung global warming, no, hindi, that's actually the observed effect. No, the observed effect. When you look at carbon dioxide and water and nitrous oxide and others, most of them parang halos similar ang kanilang mechanism, but not with the CFCs. I'll just describe them briefly. So this is what I'm talking about. What does this tell us? That whenever IR is released, no, as a part of the spectrum of the wavelengths of light coming from the sun, at saka yung nire-radiate ng planet natin palabas ng outer space, sana, most of those IR or infrared radiation are being absorbed by the bonds of these molecules, nitrous oxide, no, oxygen, and the ozone gas, the carbon dioxide and water. So when you combine all of these peaks, para po dun sa mga parang ano po yung mga yan. Ang ibig sabihin, look at the graph, no, sa x-axis natin, wavelength wavelength of the light, and this corresponds to the IR spectrum. Kung titingnan natin, yung peak, so ibig sabihin nito, doon siya nag-absorb. Yun yung parang identity nung molecule mo na nag-absorb siya ng infrared or other wavelengths of light on that region. So yung makikita natin na ang lahat ng mga ito ay nag-absorb, no? And anong gamit nito? If we know that, if you know this concept, this is the concept also behind imaging, no? Imaging techniques that the instruments are using naman to detect them in an air sample or in the atmospheric samples. Okay, so this is also another good picture. It says here that, for example, the range of wavelengths of light from UV going to the thermal infrared, kung titignan ninyo, the presence of the water, carbon dioxide, no, nakakapag-absorb talaga sila they cause some dip in the infrared radiation kasi nga ina-absorb nila yung energy na yun. Okay, so let's now proceed to another molecule. So before we proceed, ito naman ay megaton. It's 1 million tons. No, it's 1 million tons, equivalent to a teragram. And we proceed here for nitrous oxide. So what's up with nitrous oxide? Nitrous oxide is not only a potent greenhouse gas, it's also a highly reactive pollutant. Why? Your chemistry tells you that the electrons that are present in the molecule of a nitrous oxide, it can jump to different locations within that molecule. And whenever there are some forms of that molecule, we call them resonance forms or structures in your chemistry, mas marami siyang possibilities na makipag-react sa iba pang mga di ba? Sa iba pang mga species or compounds. Okay? So in our organic chemistry, it is being said that the more resonance structures, the more stable, yes. But apart from that, the more resonance structures, of course, each form can also react differently from the other. So that's it, no? And saan natin ito nakukuha? No? In the nitrogen cycle, you may review that whenever there is denitrification, no, kailangan maibalik yung nitrogen into the air. Different microorganisms can do it differently, but most of them are N2. Some of them are N2O. That's why we have a natural talaga na reservoir for nitrous oxide or sources of nitrous oxide in the planet. So this is also the same detail that the slide is showing you, no? So whenever there is a use dito po sa mga may agriculture stream dito sa atin, kung papansinin ninyo, the denitrification process is a natural process. You cannot just get rid of that. But of course, whenever you use, for example, fertilizers, the fertilizers can add to higher concentration of nitrogen that are processed by those bacteria. They could leach on soil, they could go in the bodies of water, and everything comes into the picture. That's why, so wag na gumamit ng fertilizer, hindi naman. Gagamit tayo ng fertilizer, but you have to regulate the amount of the fertilizer. No, it doesn't necessarily mean na marami ay maganda. So this somehow provides us the idea that the microorganisms that produce the enzymes are the ones that are responsible for the conversion of your nitrite going to your nitric oxide, going to your nitrous oxide. So ibig sabihin, if those bacteria and microorganisms in general are present, then you expect that there is an N2O that will be produced in that area. So ito yung sinasabi natin, example, going back to the story a while ago, whenever forests and other yung mga natin, mga shrublands mo, yung mga vegetation mo kumalat na yan at nakarating na yan dun sa mga Arctic areas, Antarctic areas, hindi lang carbon dioxide yan, mag-i-establish na rin yan ng another it would also include the alteration of your nitrogen cycle, and more N2O will be produced because of that. Again, I am not saying na putulin ang mga trees para ma-regulate yan. Ang sinasabi ko ay, if it is not naturally existing, that they shouldn't be there, then we have a problem. So we proceed. Aside from N2O, we have to talk about methane. No, methane naman po tayo. So we go back to this gigaton. So nakita ninyo, kanina megaton lang, million tons, o ito naman gigaton para sa carbon dioxide and methane. Okay, so this is the same slide that you saw a while ago. So where can we get methane? Methane is present whenever bacteria there are we call them methanogens, 'di ba? They generate or they produce methane as a part of their metabolism. That's fine. Aside from that, whenever the remains of organisms nagdecompose sila pero walang oxygen na present. Kaya nga yung sinasabi natin na anoxic conditions, walang oxygen. So pag walang oxygen, syempre ang napoproduce ay methane. And because methane is a hydrocarbon, methane can be released into the atmosphere. Otherwise, the better way is you burn it so that the methane will be converted to CO2 and water, which makes it less potent greenhouse gas. So here we have the fossil industry, deforestation. All of these are very natural soils. So nakita natin na hindi masyado ang contribution ng anthropogenic dito. Mas malaki ang contribution dito. We are talking about N2O pa pala. For N2O, ito yung mga sources na sinasabi ko kanina. So methane, ito yung binabanggit ko pala, no? So when we look at the bacterial action, methane is being generated and it is really inevitable. So looking at the for example, yung mga domesticated animals, yung cattle, yung baka, yung mga kalabaw, o kung ano man, no, they tend to produce methane when they had or have their flatulence, no. Yun nagpo-produce sila ng methane. Aside from that, yung termites, alam niyo po ba, no, yung mga termites natin or yung mga ano ba tawag doon sa termites diyan sa lugar po ninyo? Can I ask? Anong tawag sa termites? Anay kasi ito sa Filipino. Anong tawag sa termites sa inyo?
Ganun din, sir.
Anay. Okay, anay. Okay. So, ito pong mga anay na to ay naglalabas din ng methane, no? Kaya that's why, thank you po. So, kung papansinin natin, parang in some of the detection of methane, global detection of methane, they would like to track where the termites are living globally kasi those are potent emitters of methane, no? Apart from that, meron pa tayong iba. For example, yung mga rice straws, rice hulls, kapag nabulok yan ng walang enough oxygen, kailan nangyayari? When you stockpile them, no? Ini-stockpile mo yan, tapos kulang yung oxygen na pumapasok, pero kailangan na silang mag-decompose. Yan na yan, no? Magpo-produce yan ng methane. So, all of these are natural sources, by the way. And so, ibig sabihin, farming techniques lang ito at saka yung maayos na pag-dispose ng mga agricultural waste, no, ang makakapagpabawas ng ating methane sources. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm sorry about the kanina yung figure na pinakita ko, N2O yun. So this one for methane naman. So ano yan? Fossil fuels, when you use them, especially kapag hindi present ang oxygen during combustion, magpo-produce ka ng CO or the carbon monoxide, and worst case scenario would be methane, but that would be less. Agricultural waste is very na potent source, no? It's a potent source. Biomass, wetlands, and natural emissions. For example, in other countries, dun sa under the oceans, no, meron silang mga methane hydrates na tinatawag. We call them methane hydrates. And those methane hydrates are ice that has encapsulated or trapped methane in them. So, kaya sabi nila, methane hydrate is a potential fuel in the future. It's an ice, pero pagka sinindihan mo siya, nagdi-deab siya. I'm going to show you a video of that later on. So, when you look at the largest methane sources or in terms of the planet, so yung wetlands, yan, fossil fuel, ito yung nasabi ko na kanina. So agricultural wastes are very pag nabubulok yung mga dung, no, yung mga dumi ng mga hayop, yan, nagpo-produce ka rin ng methane. And also here, no, oceans, termites, other sources. So you see, so yung anay na nakikita ninyo, hindi lang yan masakit mga gat, nagpo-produce pa yan ng methane. Di ba, ang galing? And what about the sinks? No, paano siya na abstract coming from the atmosphere? So here we have the reaction of methane to other radicals, for example, OH in the troposphere or the hydroxyl radicals in the troposphere. The hydroxyl radicals are being produced when UV strikes other compounds and also with water. Soil uptake could also be a major key player. Pero yung radicals, yung kumbaga merong mga OH radicals or compounds that are present there, tapos madali silang mag-react sa methane. So I want you to look at this animation so that you could have an idea of what are the sources of methane.
This year, NASA released a new visualization modeling the sources and transport of methane across our globe. With this new visualization, we can see how methane sources vary by location and season. In South America, the Amazon River basin and its adjacent wetlands flood seasonally. This creates an oxygen-deprived environment that is a significant source of methane. In the last 200 years, methane concentrations have more than doubled, mainly due to human activities. Europe is the only region to show a decrease in methane emissions over the last 20 years. In India and Southeast Asia, rice cultivation and livestock are two of the driving sources of methane. In China, economic expansion is driving a high demand for fossil fuels, resulting in an increase in methane emissions. This is a stark difference to the Arctic, where natural sources, such as natural wetlands and potentially thawing permafrost, account for more than 70% of the region's methane emissions. Taking a step back, we could see that methane has vastly different sources around the globe. By getting a better sense of the story of methane, scientists and policymakers can better understand the sources of methane emissions and work to reduce this greenhouse gas.
Ayan, okay. So I think that's enough. Kasi ano naman yan, mga closing portions na lang yan. So you see that methane is very, parang potent ito na, na greenhouse gas. And it's very important that we can reduce our methane, methane production. Pero syempre sabi nga natin, natural yan. So somehow we cannot stop that from being produced. Ayan. So let's proceed to the last gases before we proceed to what can we do. There are two main culprits in terms of CFCs. We have the CFC 11 and 12. So nakita nyo rito that the chlorines are present, no? Yung CFC 11 meron lang siyang isang chlorine. Ang CFC 12 meron siyang dalawang fluorine molecules, and we call them chlorofluorocarbons. So what's wrong about this? No, they are present in aerosols, they are present in refrigerants, air conditioned units, and whenever the freon gets out of the system, kapag dilinis mo yan or nag-leak yan dahil nasira, tinapon mo sa basurahan, nag-generate yung or nag-release or na-release yung mga yan sa environment, eto na ang problema mo. The ultraviolet light, not the infrared light. Take note. It's kanina IR ang problema natin. No, IR inaabsorb ng ibang molecules. Dito sa mga CFCs, it's a different story. The ultraviolet light, which is a high energy light, tends to strike the bond of and breaks the bond between one chlorine atom and the CFC molecule. So it breaks off like this. So the dot there tells you that it has a certain electron. No, it has an electron without a partner. And kapag walang partner yan, nandyan, makikita nyo, ang tawag natin dyan ay radical. It's a chlorine radical. So ano ibig sabihin nun? Hahanap yan ng partner. No? Hahanap yan ng kapartner niya. Whenever these molecules are present and they reach the stratosphere, you know that there is a high concentration of ozone in the atmosphere. When you look at the stability of ozone versus the oxygen gas or O2 is more stable than O3. So ibig sabihin, kapag pwede pang mag-react yung O3 para mas bumaba pa yung kanya o tumaas pa yung kanyang stability to become just like being an O2, it will do it. So therefore, the chlorine now will abstract or will get one of those, no? Kung papansinin niyo dito sa ating figure, the chlorine radical takes one of the oxygens here from the ozone, and therefore in effect, ano nangyari? May oxygen gas ka doon, tapos meron ka ng new radical, no? The radical between the chlorine and the oxygen. So, na-resolve ba yung problema? Actually, hindi. No? Kasi nga, radical pa rin siya. So, ano gagawin yan? It will still combine with other substances. And when you look at the environmental chemistry texts, they would say that those chlorine oxygen radicals tend to combine. The chlorines go out as radicals again, and then the oxygen gas combines together to form O2. So para mas mabilis nating maintindihan, you look at the figure. Whenever there is a chlorofluorocarbon that is present, the UV breaks the chlorine. The chlorine now interferes with the existing O3. The O2 is generated, oxygen gas. Anong problema mo ngayon dito? The O3 is a potent absorber of UV light. So kapag nag-ano na siya, pag yung ozone layer natin ay naging mas manipis, mababa na ang concentration ng ozone gas sa atmosphere, it cannot protect us from the effects of the UV light coming from the sun, particularly those high energy UVs, no? And then aside from that, there's another cycle that will repeat. Another oxygen, another ozone molecule will be a victim. So in this vicious cycle, this is a vicious cycle. Ibig sabihin, paulit-ulit yan. And that's what makes CFCs very problematic when they are in the atmosphere. Sabi nga rito, tingnan nyo ha, over 20 years, yung isang molecule na yon ng CFC, hanggat hindi mo siya naaalis sa atmosphere, it will catalyze that same chain reaction. Therefore, the ozone in the stratosphere will keep on decreasing yung concentrations niya. Kaya ang sinasabi is that kung hindi na natin sila kayang scavenge kasi hindi mo yung pwedeng hulihin sa taas, 'di ba? Hindi mo yung pwedeng alisin doon, wag na nating dagdagan. Wag na nating dadagdagan. And there are some of the protocol yung ng mga international agreements like the Montreal Protocol in 1987. Yeah. So pinapareduce natin yung use of CFCs. And somehow more or less successful naman tayo diyan. How come that we say that we are successful? Para po sa mga teachers, kasi mga would-be teachers tayo, no? You can visit the NASA website. This is free. No, the resource is free, and you can see here the concentration of the visualization of the concentration of ozone. Tignan natin, no? So parang nasa acceptable values yung green, blue areas. Pero kapag bumababa na yan, nagiging black, no, nagiging darker, no. So ibig sabihin mas manipis yung ozone sa mga areas na yan. And it is not the same for all the countries. So when you get the video coming from the website, it looks like this. So for the entire year, and there are different parang seasons, you can see that the amount of our ozone tends to increase or decrease through time. Pero the earth can actually heal itself, no? Heal itself. Kumbaga parang natural lang 'yon na numinipis yan on some months, kumakapal siya on some months. Yung layer, no? O yung concentration ay tumataas at bumababa. Pero pag hindi natin kinontrol yung CFCs natin, mas mahihirapan yan mag-adjust on its natural levels. So these are some of the things that you can watch, no, and it is actually real time, no. So napansin niyo 2022 yung March 2022 yung data na pinakita ko po sa inyo, tsaka iba pa 2021 yung iba. So now let's talk and because tapusin na natin tong part na to, no. So greenhouse gases, how much do they contribute to our global warming? They are not created equally naman kasi. So water, mataas ang contribution niyan sa because water has a very high concentration in the atmosphere. But what's good, nandyan siya, pag umulan, nawawala. Okay, kasi nga may hydrologic cycle tayo. The carbon dioxide is the next in line. Pero ang problem natin dito, pag nawala yung sinks natin, mareretain siya sa taas. Ang methane, gladly, it's very low, 4 to 9% only. And then others are quite non-detectable unless hindi natin kinontrol. So we look at these sources now, and being students, you now know how to, di ba? Parang maybe something's on your mind right now. If you want to control them, then you just cut off the sources or regulate them. But take note, for example, carbon dioxide, meron siyang lifetime, no, na nandun siya sa atmosphere. Okay, methane, 8 years, nitrous oxide, 121 years, and CFC, like CFC12 is 100 years. So, ang CO2, 30 to 95 years. See? So, ibig sabihin, yung mga yan, hanggat hindi if you leave them alone, natural ano lang tayo, wala tayong intervention at all. Ito ang in-expect natin na haba ng panahon that they will stay there. Okay? Now let's look about gender because the main theme of this talk is about gender equality, the role of genders here, no, parang or in mitigating the disasters brought by climate change. One thing is that ako, on a personal note, no, I would say that both genders or all genders, both sexes are responsible for keeping the planet healthy. 'Di ba? Wala tayong pinipili diyan, babae, lalaki, anumang gender ang kung ano yung feel mo na gender, it's your expression, it's okay, it's fine. But when it comes to the health of the planet, it doesn't necessarily mean na na parang meron tayong differences or discrepancies on that. But one thing is for sure, the vulnerability of women, for example, is higher than men when it comes to the effect of the global warming. So ibig sabihin, to make it shorter, no, parang kung sa magagawa, yung kaya mong gawin to save the planet, it's the same. Pero sa vulnerabilities, mataas ang vulnerability ng mga babae. So I got some information coming from the United Nations, and this is what they say in an article entitled Women in the Shadow of Climate Change. So sabi nga dito, 70% of the population in areas with extreme poverty or poor countries or developing countries, women. They are women. 1.3 billion of them. So therefore, whenever there's an effect of the climate change, they will be the ones who will, experience it the most. Women predominate the world's food production. Sa kanila yan, for example, yung mga nagtatanim, no? Yung mga nagga-garden, yung mga natin yung mga nasa mga rice fields natin, hindi lang naman lalaki lahat ang nagtatanim diyan at nagtatrabaho diyan, also women. And that's why they do not own much of the land, but they are working on those lands. Women represent a high percentage of poor communities that are highly dependent on local natural resources for livelihood. And we have to educate women as well as men. For example, the household sources of carbon dioxide, when you burn fuels, pinabayaan mo na lang yan dyan, no, na para maubos na lang yung fuel, hindi mo in-extinguish, o yan, problema na yan. Nakakadagdag ka pa sa CO2 and H2O emissions. And also, whenever there are some problems in food security, dahil mataas nga yung population ng women sa developing countries, sila din yung unang tatamaan niya. They have so many concerns, keeping the family alive, taking care of children, no, and other things that they are on their plate. So women have limited access to and control of environmental goods and services. Most of them because they are busy working at home. They don't like to, alam nyo, mag-subscribe pa sa mga ganyan. It doesn't necessarily mean that men are also doing or are doing better than them. Pero ganun talaga, no? Pagdating sa decision making, most of the leaders, I think now marami na tayong leaders na women. Pero yun na nga, no, we have to give them chance to lead and somehow share their expertise as well to combat or mitigate climate change. Ito yung sinasabi ko po kanina, no, yung naka-red in your screen. During extreme weather conditions like droughts or floods, women tend to work more to secure the household livelihood. No, sila din talaga yan because they have to keep the family alive, yung mga household chores and everything. And in the middle of those things, they're actually doing something that releases greenhouse gases, no, in the atmosphere, which is pag bumabalik naman yung epekto, sila din talaga yung madaling matamaan. When coupled with inaccessibility resources and you don't consider them in decision making, that's the problem now. There is a disproportion between what the women and men can do or other genders and sexes. Para sa akin, no, parang ito yung parang pinaka-meat ng ating concern. And then that's why it leads us to this very short yet important thing. Hindi na natin kailangan pahabain. When we consider policy, for example, policies, we have to consider the women, no, women. We have to give them some space also in leadership, no, in leadership. Aside from that, syempre dahil sila yung nasa households, if we want to lessen the carbon dioxide emission, from combustion and others, uses of fuel, yung mga ganito, hindi lang ine-educate dapat yung ano no, yung tatay, no, yung parang pinaka head of the family, hindi ganoon. Now we have to educate also women because they are the ones taking care of these things. No, they are taking care of these things. So I hope that you get that point. Okay? So this I think is the last set of two videos that I want you to watch.
Why gender matters for effective adaptation to climate change. The impacts of climate change, including seasonal changes, sea level rise, and extreme weather events, are already affecting people's lives in both subtle and devastating ways. Adaptation to climate change is the process of building the resilience of communities, ecosystems, and economies to these impacts. It requires action at all levels, from individuals, governments, and the international community. For adaptation to be effective, it's important to recognize that the impacts of climate change affect different people in different ways. How they are affected depends on where they live and how they earn their livelihoods. In many contexts, it also depends on their gender. Women, men, and non-binary people often play different roles in their households and communities. They also have different access to resources and opportunities. These differences influence their vulnerability to climate risks, as well as their capacity to prepare for and manage the impacts. Women and non-binary people are often at a disadvantage as they face barriers in realizing their rights due to norms, traditions, and policies that perpetuate gender inequality. Other forms of discrimination, for example, based on race, being indigenous, or having a disability, also play a role in making some people more vulnerable than others to the same climate impacts. This means we can't look at gender in isolation. A gender-responsive approach is intersectional, recognizing that people have multiple identities that shape their experiences. A gender-responsive approach focuses on three things: who matters, who decides, and who benefits. The answer to the question of who matters is, of course, everyone. Everyone matters when it comes to managing the impacts of climate change. This means that investments in adaptation must be designed to meet different needs, taking into account people's gender and their social status. When it comes to who decides, we must consider who is typically excluded from planning and decision-making. A gender-responsive approach brings diverse voices to the table, recognizing the value of their knowledge and their potential as agents of change. Without careful attention to gender and social dynamics, there is a risk that adaptation investments actually reinforce existing inequalities in wealth and power structures, rather than benefiting the most vulnerable people. Adaptation is effective when it is equitable, providing opportunities and benefits for all people. Governments, private sector actors, civil society organizations, and communities around the world are ramping up efforts to respond to the impacts of climate change. We have an opportunity to ensure that these efforts also generate progress towards gender equality. To make this happen, we need a gender-responsive approach to adaptation. This is the only way we can build families, communities, and societies that are resilient to the impacts of climate change.
Okay. I think that's those are some of the references that you can get. Ayan. So sabi nga no, parang this I would like to end this talk. I would like to quote Deborah Roberts when she said that sorry. Hindi ko na-open yung video ko. Ayan, so we have to act. We need a whole of society approach. No one can be left out. So it has nothing to do with the gender. Kasi pagdating sa gender, lahat tayo responsible talaga yan. No? Women which are also or who are also parts of our families, no? So yun parang hindi na siguro natin pinag-uusapan yung ano dito, yung sino dapat ang alin. We have to do everything to save the planet because more or less when it backfires to us, of course our families will be affected. Our, 'di ba, yung loved ones mo, nandiyan na lahat yan. So no one can be left out, no household, no business, no agreement. And I would like to cite most of the slides that I have shown this morning are Creative Commons coming from the Global Carbon Project. So libre po ang mga resources na ito. You can use them when you are free to share, to adapt their slides. O basta wag niyo lang baguhin yung mga information, of course. And of course the IPCC 6 assessment report, which is dated 2022. So updated po ito. They have their accepted version. And with that, thank you everybody for listening and bearing with me. Salamat po. Hello?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Christ John M. Pastor from Philippine Normal University, Manila. And thank you so much to our excellent speakers, Professor Sherwin Saquing from Pathway Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, and Dr. Christian Pastor from Philippine Normal University, Manila, for sharing your knowledge and expertise, and of course, for sharing your precious time with us. And we are very much grateful to have you as our speakers for today's webinar. So before we proceed with the next part of our program, can we give our speakers a virtual applause or a heart react to show our appreciation to our dear speakers? Pwede po ba? Isang virtual applause or heart react. Okay, thank you very much. And I know some of you have questions in mind for our invited speakers. We will be entertaining, or our speakers will answer all of your questions later on our open forum. And now, to give us some reaction or reflection from the discussion earlier, let us have the representative from 3 BIMSI. Let us all welcome Miss Lanrose V. Dunca.
Good morning po. Am I audible po?
Yes, yes.
Thank you po. To our Executive Director and Provost, Dr. Leia S. Cortez, to our Dean for Academics and TLE, Dr. Amor F. Luniza, to the Director of Finance, Engineer Dandy Suryo, to all campus academic officials, to the faculties for Pathway Learnings, to the former Head of Gender and Development, Ma'am Brenda Villamor, and to the newly designated Head of GAD, Professor Iona Ofelia Zanoria, and to our speakers po for today, Professor Sherwin Jerry Paul B. Saquing and Dr. Chris John M. Pastor. A pleasant morning po. So first of all po, thank you so much for the very informative and enticing discussions about gender equality and climate change, which gives me a new perspective of seeing things during the discussion. During the discussion po, it comes to me that gender equality and climate change are concepts not separate from each other, in a way that people's positive involvement or collective efforts are necessary to achieve balance when it comes to these important concepts. As a BEMC student, we use the symbol equal in most of our math activities, particularly in identifying relationships between variables and quantity. With our discussion for today, the equal symbol goes beyond my common content knowledge, and I realized that it is not only the z, x, or y, or any variable that can have value, so does the equal symbol. The equal symbol has an amazing value in empowering people and genders even across borders and different aspects of our existence. It makes me aware as future educator to be mindful and careful in my pedagogy, and to always make sure that the learning materials will not show or promote gender inequality like the sample module showed earlier. To always be gender sensitive and to utilize gender fair language. The inequality is really a problem because it affects all aspects of our existence, as mentioned earlier. The hashtag men empowering women is something new to me. I haven't heard it before, but the weight of the concept is interesting in promoting gender equality, since it is an issue not limited to one gender po. The connection of gender equality and gender sustainability become clearer to me, and thank you po Professor Sherwin Jerry Paul V. Saquing for the very informative discussion. To our second speaker po, Dr. Chris John M. Pastor, thank you po as well for the very informative topics about the present status of the world in terms of temperature, which is broader and problematic in a sense that irreversible effects are possible if the temperature continue to rise due to excessive carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and CFC-12. As shown in the video of NOAA Arctic report, the impact of climate change is alarming even at different geographical locations. In our course po, which is BEMC, we have integrated science subject which taught us how global warming and anthropogenic sources amplify the strength of typhoons these days. I agree po with what you said earlier that the teachers or future educators have to be updated of such vital data about Earth status from time to time and to present them to our future pupils to increase their awareness about climate change. Women are vulnerable to climate change due to gender inequality in making decisions and inaccessibility to resources. And I learned from that gender responsive approach is important in climate change adaptations since everything all aspect of our existence is connected to gender equality. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elena Rose Dunca from a 3 BINC. And now, let us have the representative from a 4 BTLE Alpha, Ms. Joy Trisha May Corpus.
Malinaw po ba?
Yes.
So, good afternoon po. I am Joy Trisha May P. Corpus from 4BTLA AFA, and climate change is one of society's most urgent environmental issues as we learned from the discussion. And while everyone is directly or indirectly affected by it, climate change is nowhere near gender neutral. As the findings of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, suggested, the marginalized or disadvantaged populations, which include women and girls, are also the most likely bearers of climate change's greatest impacts. So, as the discussion tackled, women and girls are more vulnerable in the face of severe weather conditions, disasters, and their implications to agriculture, food production, food security, natural resources, health, settlements, security, socioeconomic status, and equity in general. So a stark example are the women in agriculture. Female farmers comprise 45% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries, even reaching 60% in some parts of Africa and Asia, as documented by FAO. And if farmers are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including but not limited to unpredictable weather patterns, stronger storms, change in biodiversity, change in areas suitable for cultivation, biological changes such as change in blooming and harvesting seasons and crop production. And in animal production, it can be change in fertilization, breeding, and even pasture production, change in ecosystem, and etc. Female farmers are more vulnerable than their male counterparts because one, most female farmers don't own their lands and they have less access to and control over resources, farm inputs, capital, technology, market, and information. Thus, their difficulty in climate change adaptation. Two, they have heavy workloads and multiple roles within the productive and reproductive spheres. And lastly, they are poorly represented in agricultural organizations and decision-making bodies. Thus, the rise of gender-blind policies, which overlook the different needs, roles, and responsibilities of men and women. I think what we need is increased female representation in key decision-making bodies at local and national level, access to resources, and adaptive capacity trainings. While women and girls have been proven effective change makers and advocates of climate change adaptation, resiliency, and mitigation, we are still regarded as untapped top resource. And if we can if we can remove the barriers and empower more women in the fight against climate change, I believe we'll get better results. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss Joy Trisha May Corpus from a 4 BTLE AFA. Last but not the least, from a 4 BTLEHE, let us all welcome Miss Jamaica C. Trinidad.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Here's my reaction or reflections about the talk a while ago. So, gender equality has nothing, or it has something to do with equal conditions, treatment, and equal opportunity. We have to be aware that women and men are being full partners in home, community, and society. And we also have to remind ourselves that equity is the process towards equality, wherein men and women should share equally distributed power and influence, equal access to education, equal responsibility at any workplace. And also, we have to be aware of any inequality indicator for us to we have to be aware for all the inequality indicators because all aspects of our being and existence are affected. So when applied to home economics, as a home economics student, gender has had an important role in the development of the field of home economics. Despite the fact that home economics is a female defined discipline, it was never intended to be a female only discipline. Moreover, the field of home economics be recognized for its ability to contribute to the reduction of gender role stereotyping in the performing of essential everyday work. So when it comes to more modern home economics research, the gender perspective is generally apparent in studies into the distribution of family work and parental responsibilities, for example. Um, Several recent studies on home economics education have emphasized the need for a gender perspective and have contributed to the understanding of the influence of gender on educational practices. Addressing gender equality from the perspective of creating equal empowerment and enabling environment is a common approach. We stress the importance of practical themes in offering venue for the advancement of gender equality inside and through education. So looking at the course itself, the home economics area, it appears to be a course intended to be a life orientation course for both boys and girls, regardless of the gender. So, in other words, if the course is structured in this way and made mandatory at the fundamental level, the gap or inequality that currently exists may be reduced or eliminated. Now, when it comes to the climate change, as mentioned earlier, global situations fluctuate. We also observe the warming of the environment, the typhoon, and it is known that human activities are the main driver of the climate change. So, including environmental costs makes decision making more complex, but adds on important dimension for responsible member of the society. And again, in fighting the climate change, as a home economics student, many everyday decisions impact carbon footprint and global warming decisions about what food, cleaning products, and clothes to buy, as well as decisions about transportation, heating, and lighting. So the majority of emissions created by person originate from their home, transportation, and food. Home economics offers a better opportunity to put into practice a variety of skills that are necessary in everyday life, as well as climate change mitigation efforts. So naturally, when it comes to home economics, the topic of food is the most hands-on when it comes to climate change. So food and housing account for more than half of an individual carbon footprint, preparing plant-based meal, reducing food waste, and investing in energy conservation should play all a significant role in household, of course, without affecting the quality of life. Home economics, with its emphasis on teaching about food, can serve as an entry point for educating people about food system and assisting them in making more environmentally friendly choices. And usually the most environmentally friendly food is also the most economical and healthiest choice available. So again, our duty as consumer is to be is for the critical consumption as well as the development of new sustainable economic structure, and I think it can provide prospect for fighting climate change. And remember that both genders are responsible for keeping the planet healthy. That would be all.
Thank you very much, Miss Jamaica Citridad from a fourth year BTLEHE. And at this juncture, everyone, I guess we're all ready to continue with our program to our open forum. Ang una pong magbibigay ng kanyang katanungan ay magmumula po sa first year. Tinatawagan ka po, Miss Abigail Carulio. Miss Abigail, you can...
Good morning po. Dinig po ako?
Yes, loud and
Yes
clear.
po. So, I would like to greet everyone first. Good morning po. And thank you so much po for this very informative discussion. So, gusto ko lang po, kanina po sa discussion, malinaw po na ipinaliwanag sa amin na yung climate change po ay may gender impact dahil po meron nga pong gender inequality na present sa ating society. So, gusto ko lang po sanang itanong kung how can the laws tackling gender inequality such as the Republic Act number 9710 or Magna Carta of Women help to enhance disaster resilience in our country po? So again po, my question po is, paano po kaya na yung mga laws po na about po sa gender inequalities ay nakakatulong po to enhance the disaster resilience po ng ating country? So that would be all po. Thank you.
Is that for me? Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for that question. We have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, that the Magna Carta for women is a summary of all the rights and of women, including the ways that they eliminate discrimination through recognition, protection, and fulfillment and the promotion of these same rights. Aside from that, yung framework po ng Magna Carta for Women is based directly on international law. So it is a recognition of the role of women, kung ano ang pwede nilang gawin. Hold on. Kung ano ang pwede nilang gawin sa mundong ginagalawan natin. And part of that is, was she asking on disaster resilience? Tama ba?
Yes po, sir.
Yes, on disaster resilience, ang talk ko kanina palagi kong ini-stress is, we are all in this together, okay? We are all in this together. Although this is not my original words, lahat tayo magkakasama dito. So in disaster resilience, the Magna Carta for Women can have a role here because it recognizes that women have a role in every aspect of our being, including disaster resilience. Which means that perhaps in one aspect, there could be women participation, for example, in policy formulation on disaster resilience. For example, or being on the ground itself in disaster resilience. We now see very many women volunteers who sacrifice much of their time, effort, and resources whenever there are disasters that happen. Okay, so disaster resilience for some time has been has been a man's world, so to speak. They drive the ambulance, they they carry the stretchers, etc. But there, little by little, there are women who are taking part in this. Okay? Aside from that, when disaster resilience is yung bang merong tayong foresight. We know what to do before something happens. We know what to do before something happens. And because of there are it is a characteristic of women which is not unique for women. So by the way, that there is we have a foresight of what will happen. Yung tipo anong mangyayari pag ganito, anong mangyayari pag ganyan. So there is a certain gut feel ba? May gut feel tayo na masasabi natin na paano kaya pag ganito? Paano pa kaya there are some now who are involved in plan A, plan B, plan C when we talk about disaster resilience. Okay? Pero napaka-importante dito na sasabihin ko is everyone is affected by everything that happens in the world. Okay? Napakaganda ng discussion kanina ni Dr. Pastor na lahat-lahat ng nangyayari dito sa buong mundo, lahat tayo ay bahagi nito. Why? Because we cannot get out of the world. We cannot get out of the world and just look at it from a distance. We are within the world. We are inside of it and we become responsible for everything that happens within it. Thank you.
Thank you so much po, sir. Pwede pong mag-follow up question pa po. Ay,
Yes, please.
hindi na po actually follow up, but it's actually my second question na po.
Okay.
So kanina po, malinaw po na na-discuss ni Sir Chris po na although yung mga women po ay isa po sa pinaka naaapektuhan sa mga epekto po ng climate change, ay sila din po yung may mga sila din po yung less na hinihingan po ng opinion or ng decision when it comes to planning po or participation in preparing po sa mga bagay po regarding sa climate change or sa sa mga iba pa pong bagay. So my question lang po is, how can we ensure po or how do we ensure that women views and interests are reflected in policies and programs revised to address the climate change? Since yun nga po, women's nga po yung isa sa pinaka naaapektuhan po ng mga epekto po ng climate change.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very beautiful question. Apparently, that goes to policy formulation. Paano maririnig ng mga kinauukulan ang boses ng kababaihan? In policy formulation, for example, there is very minimal, so to speak, participation from women. For example, in the House of Representatives right now, I look into the Committee on Natural Resources, for example. The chairperson is male, and among the vice chairs, there are only 2 of 8, if I'm not mistaken. There are only 2 of 8 vice chairs. What we do, what I always espouse or encourage people is to make our voices heard. Number one, by actively participating at our level. For example, palapit ng election. Make sure that whoever we elect could easily become an echo of our sentiments in the place that they will be elected to. For example, you're voting for your congressman, or Congress or your representative. You're voting for your senator. Look at their qualifications and look at their opinions or thoughts or whatever they have done in response to climate change, in response to the need for gender equality. Another thing is, for us to make our voices heard, that's why we call them House of Representatives. They represent us. So we make sure that our voices are heard. Ang ginagawa namin sa amin kasi is we send or we make our our representatives aware of our sentiments. So we send letters, we go to social media, but of course you have to be responsible in social media. We go to social media to express our views on certain things. But of course, on social media na, as mentioned a while back doon pa lang sa house rules natin, there has to be a certain level of respect and responsibility. Kasi importante ang boses ng bawat isa. If you write your senator or if you write your representative in Congress and speak out about your advocacy, about your concern, about your issue, they will not ignore that. They will not ignore that because every voice counts, and especially during this election, every vote counts as well. So in this sense, na kahit minimal pa lang ang participation women sa policy formulation. May participation ka. If you are a woman or perhaps if you are a man, you could write a letter and that's one voice. And mas maganda pa, ang mas uso ngayon is signature campaign. That all of your thoughts would be replaced in one letter or in one document, and you write all of your you affix all of your signatures there. The more that we are, the more bonded we are, the stronger our voice will be. So that you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are all in this together. So little by little, sinasabi natin na walang boses, pero pag pinagsama-sama natin ang mga maliliit na mga tinig natin, lumalakas ang boses natin sa kanila. Does that answer your question, Miss Abigail?
Yes po, sir. Thank you so much po. So before po kasi magbigin yung discussion, actually I was really confused po na po talaga. Ay hindi naman po confused, pero kasi po 'di ba yung climate change po, it is really urgent po. Kumbaga kailangan na po talaga siya masolusyonan dahil lumalala po talaga siya over time. Then tapos i-connect pa po siya sa gender inequality, which is a huge systematic problem na matagal na pong present sa ating society, and until now hindi pa nasusolusyonan. So kanina po confused po ako na sabi ko paano masosolusyonan paano natin ma-achieve yung sustainable future kung ididikit pa yung climate change na very urgent sa isang huge systematic problem. But as the discussion goes on po, dun ko po na-realize kung gaano po kalaki yung role na ginagampanan ng gender equality para po sa sustainable development po ng ating environment and ng future. Thank you so much po.
Thank you so much. A very interesting reflection and revelation from you, Miss Abigail.
Thank you so much, Professor Sherwin. I guess Dr. Pastor wants to add something.
Hello,
Hello,
Abigail. I totally agree with what Sir Sherwin mentioned. At saka dadagdagan na lang natin, no? Kasi most of the time, parang, there are parang limited siguro opportunities or otherwise, baka hindi naman laging ganun yung case. Pero we have to look at empowering the women and educating them kasi mas marami kasi silang ginagawa. You see, parang sa sobrang dami ng concerns nila in everyday life, they might not have that much time to check on these things. No, yung makialam ka pa sa mga ganyan sa dami ng ginagawa mo, you're concerned with your family, you're concerned with your kids, ang dami mong dapat gawin sa araw-araw. Mas busy ang babae sa loob ng tahanan kumpara sa lalaki. Totoo naman yan. You see it during the pandemic, in your family, sino mas busy dyan, di ba? So kung titingnan natin, parang we have to empower women. We have to push this educating everybody. Tayo, parang maswerte tayo because we are in the campus, nakapag-aral tayo. Pero you go outside, there are so many women there who doesn't know all of these things. Now, how would you make them care if they don't know about this? That's a problem. So, ibig sabihin, parang kaya nga yung mga God training na ito, maganda siya in a way that everybody with capacity like us or has the capabilities could be informed, and then at the same time you do something to spread these things doon sa mga iba naman na medyo less ang opportunity. And then once that you have already shared this to them, then what is now the point of action? Anong gagawin nila? So yun yung kasi parang siguro pakikinggan naman yung boses kung nandun, pero how come that the voice would come out if they don't have any idea that these things are going on? Kasi they do not recognize that there is the problem. They just live day by day. Di ba ganon? Itinatawid yung araw-araw. That's a problem. So tayo, lalo na yung mga nasa BEMC, yung mga nasa agriculture, you have to use your concepts, your sciences, but do not get limit. Parang huwag kayong matuwa doon na alam nyo siya, na ipasa mo yung exam, tapos ka na. It's not like that. This is more of an advocacy formation. Di ba? Kailangan din ganun eh. Parang, ngayon that you are filled with this kind of know-how, matatahimik ka pa ba, 'di ba? So yun yung yun yung burden ngayon sa iyo kasi nalaman mo 'yan. So how will you now share it to other people so that the burden can also be transferred to them? So that's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pastor. And now isa pa pong katanungan na magmumula naman sa second year from Mr. John Lloyd Anacion.
Thank you po. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Mr. John Ray Anasyon from 2BMC, and first, gusto ko lang sabihin na na natutuwa ako sa ngayong webinar kasi bukod sa pagiging informative ng guest speakers natin, napansin ko rin na yung guest speaker natin ngayon na nag-discuss or nagpe-present about na sa gender equality is guy, and dito pa lang nakita ko na agad na-amaze ako na miski kalalakihan is nire-represent nila yung equality and yung rights ng mga babae. And now going back to my question po, about po ito dun sa nabanggit ni Sir kanina about sa unconscious gender biases. So paano po natin maiwasan yung mga unconscious gender biases? For example, hindi ko naman po intended na maging bias, pero merong mga terms kagaya po ng nasabi niyo Sir kanina, yung about sa marites, yung kapag nakikipag-interact ka sa mga kaibigan mo and accidentally nagamit mo yung mga ganong term, and yun, paano po natin maiwasan yung mga ganong bagay since unconscious po natin siyang nagagawa, parang ganun po.
Okay, I will answer this taking off from what Sir Dr. Pastor has mentioned nga. Ngayong alam na natin ano na ang gagawin natin. Okay? Ngayon alam na natin that there are times that we are guilty of unconscious gender biases like, oy, marites, ano na. Or perhaps there's another one, I wrote it down kasi baka it could help. There are times that we greet our friends on social media na, happy birthday to, and then itatag mo, my brother from another mother. Okay? Hindi natin napapansin, it could be a sign of it could be a sign of endearment na close ka dito sa taong ito. Pero when you say my brother from another mother, iba yung implication niya. So ang gagawin natin dito is, for example, on social media, we should always think before we click. And before we click, we think again before we click. Pag-isipan nating mabuti. And then there are times na in our daily conversations, there are some gender bias slurs. For example, yung hindi natin ba sinasadya. And then later on, if we realize na sinasadya, if we realize na may nasabit tayo that could hurt another person, it will never be too late to apologize and to correct yourself. Okay? Offensive yata yung nasabi ko sa iyo last time. Or on social media kasi ngayon everything has resibo eh. So in my part, for example, as I bring with me, I'm the president of the Faculty and Employees Association of my university. So before I share anything or before I upload a message, I have to think many times over. That is why what I advise you to do on social media. Pag-isipan man ng mabuti kung wala kang nasasaktan, especially during this time of election campaign. Another thing is, pag ikaw may nasambit ka na ganun, and then you realize later on that it is offensive, it does not hurt to say sorry and to apologize and to learn your lesson. Na you just put it in your mind that you have to be very careful in expressing some things to your friends or even to your relatives or family or to other people whom you do not actually know but with whom you have a connection in social media. Pero totoo yun that there are times that we may not be aware of it, pero nagkaroon na tayo, we already have become guilty of some unconscious gender biases. Okay? But the first thing now, yung sinasabi ko nga kanina sa simula, na madami tayo na pag-aralan ngayon, didikit na sa ating pagkatao at sa buong katauhan natin. What do we do? Kagaya ng sabi ni Sir Pastor kanina, let us do something about it. In the case of unconscious gender biases, we become more aware and we become more careful on how we express ourselves.
Thank you so much, Professor Sherwin. Now, it's your turn, Dr. Pastor.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree no sa sinasabi po ni Sir Sherwin. And ako naman, this is just a reminder because a word of caution or how will you take it? Because you are pre-service teachers now. Paglabas nyo doon sa teaching, hindi lang naman pagtuturo, madalas nagkakaroon tayo ng opportunity na gumawa ng instructional materials. The DepEd, for example, during the time of pandemic, they instructed teachers, no, if, kahit na old ka na sa matagal ka na sa service or bago ka pa lang, they will involve you in that process. And I hope that you will also screen and filter, no, kung ano yung mga characters na ginagamit niyo diyan sa ninyo, sa mga modules na ginagawa ninyo. Kasi katulad ng Marites, yung ganyang mga term, yan parang dahil hindi dahil sa click yan sa mga bata sa ngayon, gagamitin mo siya para maging interesting yung topic na nilalagay mo sa module mo, because it doesn't make any difference in the content that you want to deliver. 'Di ba? So ibig sabihin, you have to be mindful of that. Kaya kung sa sinasabi, nasabi mo na mahirap bawiin. Pero pagka yung nandun na sa mga modules, you have to be very careful. Why? Because you are you are catalyzing that problem again. And this time it's you. 'Di ba? Being the author of those modules. And especially when you teach, pagka nagturo na kayo, sometimes, sige, those are languages that the students can, sila doon malapit sa kanila yon, nakakatuwa yon, engaging yung discussion mo. Pero baka kakagamit mo ng mga term na yan, yun na nga, meron kang unconscious gender bias. So from your unconscious, you are now conscious about it. Yan na naman tayo. So doon na naman tayo bumabalik sa storya na yan. So you are now conscious, you have to be very careful. And hopefully hindi tayo maging hindi tayo masama doon sa mga nagdadagdag ng nagpo-propagate ng ganitong mga problema. Ayun. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pastor. And I totally agree with our speakers. Ngayon na meron na tayong kaalaman and we are all aware now. Ngayon naman, responsible naman tayo, or it is our responsibility to share what we know and to influence others kung ano ba yung dapat at tamang gawin. Alright? And now, for our third question, ibibigay po sa atin ito mula naman sa third year from Mr. Erwin Adupe.
I am audible po.
Yes. Go ahead, Erwin.
Good afternoon po to our speakers. Connected po ito dun sa sinasabi po na ngayon alam na natin at ano naman ang gagawin natin. So my question po is, paano po natin maipapaliwanag sa isang tao na hindi po bukas ang isip sa mga nangyayari sa mundo, yung about sa gender equality at climate change po?
Doc Pastor, would you like to go first?
Yes, sir. Sure po. So something that when you shout things out loud outside of a system, you will easily get resistance. That's something that we have to consider. Na ibig sabihin, parang number one, mahirap mag shout out from the outside the system. Tapos ito gawin nyo, mahirap yan. Definitely hindi ka nila susundin. You have to be a role model first. No, diba? You have to be a role model first. So kung ikaw mismo hindi mo ginagawa, nobody would believe you. Pangalawa, that when we talk about, there are people really that would subscribe to hoaxes and fake news, di ba, no? And this is nakakatakot yan. For example, climate change is not real, o gagamitin nila yung sinasabi ng NASA na natural lang naman tumataas bumababa yan, so wala kang dapat gawin na extra because it's just that, no? You have to equip yourself with information, no? Dapat meron ka nun. Kasi pagka tinapatan ka nila ng maling information at napakadami nila nun, you will get drowned. Hindi mo sila mako-convince. In the first place, you have to convince yourself that you know what you're talking about. That's really 'di ba, yung pag nakipag-usap ka, you want to tell them but in a subtle way. You don't have to correct them all the time. It's always in a subtle manner. Ma-deliver mo, you can put the message across. That's right. That's okay. Nakuha po ba? So wag natin silang i-force to change kasi hindi na talaga natin magagawa yan. Nakita natin yan sa issue ng sa COVID-19 vaccine, di ba? O ganun din yan para dito sa climate change. You cannot force them agad. But essentially, no, parang ginagawa lang natin yan kasi nga concerned tayo na sila rin yung kasama natin magsasuffer in the end. Aside from that, we have to start dun sa early age. Sa early age. Kaya tong BEMC, malaki ang trabaho nyo, I'm not sure kung kung nare-realize nyo gaano kabigat ang trabaho ninyo in shaping the minds of people. Kasi once that their mind is set on that and they have been trained on that, yung meron silang ganung konteksto, hindi naman kailangan ipakita nyo na lahat tong sinabi ko kasi, di ba, infrared pa yan. Hindi na yan. Yung mga molecules, hindi na yan. But alam nyo, as a teacher, there is a challenge on us, right? Like, when you receive something that's too complex, you can design or you can make it or you can present it in a way that no matter who are you talking to, maiintindihan ka nila. Mas mahirap gawin yon actually. Mas mahirap gawin yon. For example kami ni Sir, marami kami siguro binasa, marami kami nakita. Pero nung kayo na yung kaharap namin, ito yung dapat namin ibigay. So ganun din kayo. Nakita nyo to sa amin, pagka kaharap mo elementary student, paanong gagawin mo? 'Di ba? Don't drown them just to show up or to show off. You don't have to drown them. But you have to see to it that you can affect their decisions. Kasi yun ang learning, di ba? Yung na-change mo yung behavior ng isang tao, learning yun. O yun. Kapag di mo sila nabago, edi hindi. Walang learning. Ayun. Salamat po.
Okay, thank you so much. Sir, ako actually yung din sinulat ko dito. We have to start small. You have to start small, which means as future teachers, you're tasked into the role of in loco parentis, which means when you become teachers and you handle your students, the role of the parents will have to take a backseat at kayo na ang magiging mas credible kaysa sa mga parents, sa mga bata. For example, sasabihin ng tatay or ng nanay sa bata, o matulog ka na gabi na. Sasabihin ng bata, sabi ng kailangan ko pa na mag-wash up kasi sabi ni teacher, dapat bago matulog, mag-wash up o mag-toothbrush. Hindi na iimik yung hindi na iimik yung parent kasi sinabi na ni teacher. And as future teachers, you have a certain sense of ascendancy over your learners. So ang sinasabi ko dito is you start small. Ibig sabihin, if you, for example, you are with your learners, yung bang tipong pagtapon lang ng bote ng mineral water, yung tamang pagtapon lang. Kasi the more important thing here is for us to be consistent. You have to walk the talk. Kung ano yung sinasabi mo, yun din ang ginagawa mo. Because if you preach something and do another thing, and your learners will see that from you, hindi sila maniniwala. Ang mas paniniwalaan nila, yung ginagawa mo. Okay, that's one thing. You have to start small and you talk to them at a certain level that could easily be understood by your learners, by your friends. Okay? Tayo dito, nag-uusap-usap tayo ng mga gender bias, gender equality, pero perhaps pagkausap nyo ng ibang tao, hindi na ganito ang tipo ng lengguwahe na gagamitin ninyo. Yung tipo ng lengguwahe that could easily be understood by other people, especially yung mga sarado na ang pag-iisip. Another thing, yun yung parang operative term dito. Pag sarado ng pag-iisip ng mga tao, here is what I do. I give them the worst case scenario. Okay, I give them the worst case scenario. Another thing is, I contextualize. Ibig sabihin, isinasama ko yung mga examples ko o yung mga konsepto o yung mga constructs na gusto kong i-relay, sinasama ko o inaayon ko sa circumstances ng bawat kausap ko. If I am talking to a parent, for example, and I'm talking about gender equality, I'm talking about gender bias, ang sasabihin ko, you would not want this to happen to your child, would you? Okay? You would not want this. And then, for example, ang pinag-uusapan lang namin last time, there was a film in the mid-90s, I forgot the title. It was a film, ang first shot niya ay doon sa Antarctica, yung mga madaming glaciers, tapos may mga tumubong mga bulaklak, which should not happen, you know? Parang may mga ganun, you give them a certain scenario that they can imagine, that they can understand. Yun yung ginamit ko kanina na fried rice kanina. Fried rice, before you could make fried rice, you have to steam it well, you have to cook it well. Para mga ganun na, you give them imagery that they can understand. Bakit ba saradong pag-iisip ng ibang tao? Probably because the language that we use in reaching out to them, they cannot understand. But if we use simpler languages for simple people and jargon or technical language for people who could understand this, mas madali ang pagkakaintindihan natin. Okay? So if you're talking to kids, you talk to them in a way that could easily be understood by them. That's all.
Thank you very much, Professor Sherwin and Dr. Pastor. And tama yan na dapat hindi lang tayo nag-i-impose ng mga itinuturo natin. Dapat ipinoproseso din natin. At kailangan na ituro natin ang mga ganitong usapan sa paraang mauunawaan at maiintindihan ng mga bata. Thank you so much once again to our speakers. At para po sa kasunod na magtatanong, Ms. Rose Jane Hernandez from a 4th year.
Hello po, good afternoon po. I am Rose Jane Hernandez from 4BTLA Alpha. First po, I want to say thank you po sa napakagandang discussion, Sir Sherwin and Sir Chris, thank you po. I actually have 2 questions po. First, yung about sa women in politics po. Sa school po kasi I observe, usually po, babae ang nag-lead sa mga gawain po. Even sa reporting, kahit po sa honor roll. Pero kapag po sa national post, ayaw po ng karamihan sa babae para maging leader. Aside po sa women representation, ano po kayang strategy ang pwedeng i-impose para ma-realize po ng karamihan na women can actually lead?
So that question is for me. Para ma-realize ng karamihan that women can actually lead, it is not something that they still need to realize. It is already something that is happening. Women are actually leading. There are women who are leaders, or there are women who are good leaders. What we need to, ang kailangan nating ipakita sa kanila ay mga halimbawa ng mabuting leadership ng mga babae. Okay? For example, true in Philippine politics, it is dominated by men. It is dominated by men. What we need to show them are examples or true stories, not fake news, true stories of how women are able to lead their respective communities, societies, companies, or countries for that matter. Na ang babae may kakayahan ding mamuno. Okay, may kakayahan din. I'm very careful with my words here. May kakayahan din ng babae na mamuno. Okay? May isang when I was in Manila one time, we were talking about politics. Okay, and ang totoo nga na yung mga ibang taxi drivers na nakausap ko, ang sabi nila is natatakot sila na para mas gusto nila na lalaki ang mamuno. Lalaki ang mamuno. Pero later on, when you get to talk to them, they will acknowledge as well that there are good leaders among the women. Okay? Paano sila mako-convince you? One thing is you do not give fake news. And then another thing is you give examples and you educate yourself about how women are leading in society, how women are leading in your school, for example. Because the school is a microcosm of society. Ibig sabihin, your school is a mini version of society. Kung kaya ng mga babae ang mamuno sa honor roll o mamuno sa student government in your school, then kaya din siguro, and then you could give examples. Yung pinakita ko na picture kanina ng mga babae na pangulo ng kanilang mga bansa at naitaguyod nila sa tamang pamamaraan yung management ng kanilang COVID, yung management ng COVID response nila. Okay? And then you look at other examples as well. Okay? I would like to bring this discussion to another level. Kaya lang, yun lang ang masasabi ko. Give examples, know whom you could give as examples. Okay? Kasi hindi tayo nagkukulang. Hindi tayo nagkukulang sa mga magagandang halimbawa ng pamumuno ng kababaihan. It's just that sometimes we are blinded by gender biases. We have been used to a situation where leaders are men. That is why we are pursuing or we are advocating gender equality. Okay, at the moment, what is happening is gender equity. Na nabibigyan naman na ng pagkakataon ang mga babae, pero hindi pa rin pantay yung pagkakataon na naibibigay sa kanila. Okay? Salamat.
Thank you po, sir. Then yung second question ko naman po, since women are more vulnerable po, aside po sa education, ano po kayang coping mechanisms or specific actions ang pwede po nating ibigay sa kanila para
Okay.
po, ay sige po.
You know, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Para po.
Ay, okay. Since women po are more vulnerable, aside po sa education, ano po kayang coping mechanisms or specific actions ang pwede po nating ibigay sa kanila? Yun na lang
Okay.
po.
So your question is based on the premise that women are vulnerable, which is true. That's why we have the Vow C. That's why we have the Magna Carta. That's why we celebrate the beauties and wonders and achievement of women on March. Okay. Aside from educating women about how to combat or how to go against their vulnerability and their apparent weakness, it is important for them to seek for support groups. Okay, there are support groups for women, and I'm not saying support groups na napakalaki. When there are women who support women in you know, small circles, if you have a friends, kayo mga babaeng magkakaibigan, or there is a certain isang samahan ba? Isang samahan na nagkakaintindihan kayo, and you get to share your daily experiences, you get to reach out to them and let them know about what is happening to you. Support groups are important. Okay? In a more formal sense of a support group, available do ng counseling, available do ng therapy, etc. Pero the mere fact that there are women who are willing to voice out their concerns, their issues, their preoccupations to a small support group, it's already a big step towards empowerment, because they find their voice inside they are able to voice out their concerns dyan sa mga support groups nila. Okay, another thing is, if worse comes to worse, that there are some abuses, etc. The law has extended its help to the victims, and there are bigger support groups that would address this matter. Pero oo, tama, number one, importante ang education. Pangalawa, importante na may support group. At pangatlo, doon sa grupong yan, huwag tayo maging echo chambers. Yun yung nangyayari, that we empower each other within the same group. What we want to do is we want to empower others as well who are not necessarily in the same circle we are, we are in. Okay? So, importante na meron kang makausap. Dito nagpapasok yung kumare, friend, best. Okay? Para mas ma-empower, and then little by little we get to be aware about the different circumstances involving our friends. Thank you.
Thank you po.
Thank you so much, Professor Sherwin. May idadagdag po ba si Dr. Pastor?
Yeah, kasi nasabi ni Sir na lahat halos yung ng response. So parang dito na din, sa parang ito na lang din is maybe a take home point that I would like to raise to everybody, because when you look at the participants, at mas marami nga rin yata ang babaeng participants ngayon, di ba? So ibig sabihin, parang sige, education, setting that aside, the women who are attending here in this webinar, so kayo din, kailangan din maisip niyo yung magiging role ninyo. Anong gagawin ninyo ngayon diyan? 'Di ba? So parang parang I think we can tell you what would be the best thing to do. Pero kayo ang nakakaalam ng problema ng localities ninyo at saka ng ninyo, 'di ba? So being a woman in your family, a woman in the community, how will you now actualize and apply what you have learned? So I think you have to have that sort of drive. Diba? Dapat magkaroon ng drive. Kasi kung hindi, edi ganito na lang tayo ng ganito. People will tell you what to do. We can prescribe. Nobody would even dare to do it. And then we are back to square one. That we are seeing the problem, but you are just spectators of your own problem. Diba? So yun yung isa sa mga ano, dahil maraming babae ngayon dito, sige. Tapos dahil gender, ano naman, gender equality, o di mga lalaki, ganun din naman, di ba? How can we support each other? So that, especially for example, guys, how will you support the women to achieve those things that we are talking about right now? Because just like us or men, they have also the potentials. So paano mo sila ngayon ipupush dyan? Paano mo sila ibibigyan ng opportunities? Di ba? Na parang hindi lang laging tayo. O yung mga ganun ba? And at the same time, women should have this drive to elevate. So parang, sige, nakakapagtaka nga talaga yan, institutional. Pero pagkatapos nun, pagkatapos maging leader sa school, maayos ang performance sa school, when you go towards your career, your family life, ano na nangyayari? There is a set of difference in priorities kasi when you go to the different phases of life. And for women, it's more dynamic rather than men. So kami, for example, pag lalaki, magtatrabaho siya, aakyat siya sa ladder. Ang women, marami siyang gustong gawin. Pero knowing na napakadami mong option sa buhay, how will you now excel? So that you could also be a representative of women in the community who is successful and influential at the same time. Di ba? Kasi maraming ganun option nila, nagkaroon ng anak, sige. Tapos nagsettle na sila, okay na sila doon. Hindi yun masama. Hindi masama. Pero ikaw ngayon na you know these things, how will you now go further to help them? So that's something that you have to consider as well. 'Di ba? Ayun. So I think that we have to look on these things. Salamat po.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. And let us all believe that as a youth, we can do so much. Lalo na ngayon, marami ng platforms, may avenue tayo para mas lumawak pa yung influence natin sa iba, and we can make a difference to our communities. Thank you so much once again to our speakers. At yun na po yung ating last question. And now we're going to head on to the awarding of the certificates. And let me read to you the content of the certificate. The Philippine Normal University South Luzon, the National Center for Teacher Education, the Technology and Livelihood Education Hub, Office of Gender and Development in partnership with Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. This certificate of recognition is given to Professor Sherwin Jerry Paula V. Saquing for sharing his expertise as resource speaker in gender equality and climate change in celebration in the International Women's Day, given this 16th day of March 2022. Signatory, Leia Amor S. Cortez, Executive Director and Provost. Once again, this certificate of recognition is given to Professor Sherwin Saquing, and another certificate of recognition is given to Dr. Chris John M. Pastor. Thank you so much once again to our excellent speakers. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And once again, of course, your precious time with us.
Salamat po.
Maraming salamat pong muli sa aming mga speakers. And before po tayo mag-photo op, okay, wala pa pong photo op kasama si Dr. Pastor. Okay, sige po. Isang photo op daw po muna kasama si Dr. Pastor. Sige. I would like to request everyone po to please turn on your cameras para po magpa-picture daw po muna tayo kaya Dr. Pastor. Before we head on to our closing remarks. Sige po, inaanyayahan ko po ang lahat na mag-open po ng kanilang camera for our photo opportunity. Okay, sige po. Ilang panel po ba? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay na po ba, Sir Josh? Sige po. Smile lang po. Marami ata yung panel natin. Okay na daw po. Okay, thank you so much po. And now for the closing remarks. Let us have the founder and chief executive officer of Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. Let us all welcome Dr. Mary Paulina V. Saki.
Thank you very much, Martina. Respected officials of our partner institution, Philippine Normal University South Luzon, headed by Executive Director and Provost Dr. Leia Amor Cortez, faculty members, students, colleagues from Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, good morning. It is past midnight here in the USA, afternoon in the Philippines, but as they say, one never goes wrong with good morning greetings. Ode to the constructed gender roles women have in societies, in communities, and especially at home, women are seen as more affected by the effects of climate change. It is for this reason that it is necessary to include women in the drive to face these, as mentioned earlier. With gender equality, women should be given the same opportunities as men to be part of the solutions to problems as such. In our simple contributions to gender equality, we can also be part of the efforts to mitigate the impact of climate change. We can, in our own ways, demonstrate gender sensitivity, perhaps starting with using gender-fair language or avoiding taking part in propagating gender biases in our households, campuses, and workplaces. Now that we know better, we can consciously educate ourselves further, practice, and make a good habit out of it. We can keep empowering women and take care of the environment as much as we can, irrespective of our sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. As we close this program, I would like to thank our dear speakers for their significant contribution to today's affair. The same goes to the reactors, organizers, guests, and participants, as well as, of course, the officials who made this possible. We at Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated, a company that is very passionate about women empowerment and gender equality, are very grateful to the PNU South Luzon GAD office for giving us the opportunity to be part of this endeavor. Again, thank you all so much, and as I am tasked to do, I officially close this program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mary Paulina V. Saquing, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. Maraming salamat po. At sa inyo pong lahat, maraming salamat po sa mga organizers po ng ating webinar. Thank you very much sa ating pong GAD office, and of course, to the Pathways Center for Lifelong Learning Incorporated. Maraming salamat po. And sa ating pong mga participants, maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo sa ating webinar ngayong araw na ito. Ang atin pong evaluation link ay makikita sa ating chat box. And of course, once again, thank you very much to our speakers. Napakagagaling ng ating mga speakers. Maraming salamat po. Marami po kaming natutunan mula sa inyo ngayong araw. At babaunin po namin ito hanggang sa amin pong pagtuturo. Maraming salamat po. And thank you also to the former Gender and Development Head ng PNU South Luzon po, Professor Brenda Villamor, and thank you very much din sa ating bagong Godhead, Professor Iona Ofelia Zanoria. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Hanggang sa susunod po ulit na webinar, magkikita po ulit tayo. Once again, good morning and thank you very much, and God bless us all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.